I'm Ryan Mullally. I'm an attorney who's litigated at every level of the U.S. judicial system, and this is Natural Law. And I'm joined with Ukerist. You use your real name as well, though, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Philip was fine.
yeah. My friend Ukerist, Philip. Philip, can you, for those of you who don't know, I think most of my audience does, but maybe give a little biographical background.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, my name's Philip. I teach political science. So I started hanging out in these sort of like online debate circles when I was in grad school during COVID, like a lot of people. And so my main fields are political theory and American politics. So I mostly deal with like the normative side of political science, or what my colleagues sometimes call fake political science, right? So most people who do poli sci are interested in descriptive and empirical claims about politics and the study of it. I deal more with claims about the sort of oughts as opposed to ises, and usually that's through the history of political thought. So what did this old person in the past say about this, and why should we take it seriously? So I'm really interested in like American political thought, American founding, but also ancient stuff. Teach a lot of Plato, Aristotle, that kind of thing. And then also, because my second field's American politics, I end up getting roped in to teach things like public policy, even constitutional law. Though I have not been to law school, I still have to teach my students that. So yeah, it's a fun time. I enjoy it. So.
Yeah, and Philip has a reputation for being as good faith as good faith comes in this tortured space that is the political debate sphere online. And Philip is the rare guy who displays more books in his background than I do, filling my heart with like a deep black jealousy about the size of the bookshelves. Like there's
size envy. Yes, that's book collectors have this. Yeah.
Well, it was a terrible moment when me and my wife were still like apartment hopping before we bought the house. You know, one of the moves we were like, we just can't. We just can't. We can't pack up all these books again. We need to downsize the book collection, and we stripped like 2 bookshelves worth. And like, I kind of regret it. Now, would I have read them again? No. Are they all on my Kindle? Yes, because we were specifically like YA fantasy and like the huge collection of that we had. But you know, I kind of wish I had them. There's something about just having them.
No, it is nice to have them, and a lot of my books I end up using for reference. But it's more obviously, you know, at a certain point you get more books than you can possibly make good use of. It's just having them available is, I think, a value in itself. So, and you know, if you have kids too, having books around is great because then they can always have something to read. They no excuses for boredom when you have multiple thousands of books. So.
Yeah. So I was really excited to chat with you. I know we've been trying to schedule something for a while, and I think there's a few ways we could take this conversation, and I'm open to however you want to do it. I think on one topic that we were talking about previously was just kind of like my own evolution from like debating and speaking from a centrist position to then saying like, no, I'm on the right, which is not the direction that I guess a lot of like YouTube politics would have preferred that I go, I suppose. Yeah. And then there's kind of like the actual state of the right and where you find that. And we've had some conversations about that as well. So we'll kind of leave it to you. Like, where do you want to take this conversation?
Yeah, I would be curious actually to hear a little bit more about that, because I do remember when you were first kind of popping on the scene, kind of describing yourself as a centrist. I know that you've said that you, for most of your life, have voted for Democrats, especially in national elections. But maybe if I'm wrong, correct me. But I would be curious to hear more about that, because I think you're right. That is a move that, well, I mean, you know, some people would argue lots of people make this move, but they just lie about it. You know, the Tim Pools of the world who still say they're centrist or whatever, but they're really just fascists, or I don't know. But yeah, I'd be curious about that, because I came into this calling myself a conservative, but then being very self-conscious of the fact that I was different than the other conservatives. Like, I've never been MAGA. I would call myself it's cringe now to call yourself a never Trump conservative, but I guess that's camp that I've always been in, was just like, I just never went through a phase where I was even like remotely impressed. So I was different, I guess, than the other people who were on the right. So I would be curious, like, what led to, like, what was the process of like coming to identify with that, and then what really did it entail? Did it entail any actual position shifts, or was it just sort of realizing that's where you most comfortably fit?
I think I think there has been some evolution in my positions as I've been like forced to, through dialogue, explain them more. And then you're like, oh, wait, what is the logical consequence of this principle? And then you're like, oh, that actually goes further to the right than I thought it did. Right. So but I think the big one, if I was going to it's going to make me sound like such a naive asshole, but I think the truth is, in law school, I got exposed to principled right-leaning thought for the first time. I read Scalia, and I was like, "Holy shit, I'm an originalist! Like he's right. This is the only way to safeguard the Constitution. You just can't do what the liberal justices are doing. It is a road to disaster. Sure. He's right, they're wrong." And then when I didn't speak publicly, and then, in COVID, everyone starts thinking about speaking publicly. I start doing this a few years later. And I had this sense that when I started talking to at least the center left, I would be like, "Hey, I've been a good soldier. I was voted left my whole life. But wait a minute, there's all this stuff we're getting wrong. There's some stuff that we're really getting wrong, and we could fix this. And we should." And I went to tell them about it, and the response was, "We already know about that, and we're doing it on purpose." And it's like, oh, that's tough, because when you talk about the core issues on this channel, like originalism, natural law, natural rights, American philosophy, the idea of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. These are things that if you speak to people on the right, resonate. Even if they're not into politics, they resonate. You'll be like, "Yeah, do humans have a nature?" They're like, "Yeah." Should we maximize life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? They're like, "Obviously, go America, bald eagle," right?
Yep.
And on the left, they're like, "Well, liberty means the government paying you to be able to do things, right?" And you're like, "What? Whoa, no!" So that's my problem. Is that as I found out what the ideas I wanted to advocate for I found out that there's fertile ground for them on the right and nothing on the left. Sure. Nothing. They don't want to hear it at all. So then, where does that leave me?
So what do you think about what I would describe as the left's recent rediscovery of the Constitution? They're at least apparent or purported fascination with limits on the executive, for example, or just like, "Hey, here are things the government can't do. I read this thing. Isn't it neat? Look what it says." What do you think about that? Do you think there's any hope there, actually, that in response to the Trump phenomenon, we're going to find some people on the left who are now enamored with something, if it's not originalism, at least closer to it, or at least textualist, at least let's pay attention to what the Constitution says, or something like this?
No, I have no hope for that, because here's the thing. That's why I voted for Biden. That was my best argument for voting for Biden. Was I didn't love Biden, but I was like, okay, he's like a veteran. He's going to be a one-term president. I thought, I was like, there's no way this guy thinks he can run again.
Run.
Yeah, that's crazy. And he's going to come in and he's going to scale back executive power and kind of restore the guardrails and be the adult in the room. That was my argument for Biden. And then he did the exact opposite. Just he continued the trajectory of every president wielding more executive president than the president that came before. So he was no exception to that. I don't see why the next guy would be either. And the thing about the left that I find disconcerting is that they're complaining about executive authority now, but they're complaining about it in the wrong places, right? The power over international trade, international relations, immigration, the military. This is core executive stuff. This is where the executive should have broad powers. Whereas domestic policy, regulating the economy, regulating, our medical decisions, the power of the purse just to forgive massive debts. These are the things where the executive should have limits. So that's my other suspicion, is that I feel like they're doing it. I feel like they're enamored with these constitutional provisions suddenly because they're the opposition party and they have to say something. Yeah. I don't think it's genuine.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do, from my, weird never Trump side of the conservative spectrum, I do wonder those issues that you just mentioned. I generally speaking thought the tariffs decision was good. I liked it. I thought the reasoning was fine. So I heard you discuss some of it, and so I think you're right, exactly right, that when the president is dealing with these things that are international, that have to do with the military, we are approaching the far extreme of his authority. But when it comes to things some of the forms of ICE enforcement, some of the forms of tariff enforcement, then we're getting into some dicey waters at times. And at the very least, this has been the drum I've been beating the whole time for my, I guess the people to the right of me, or at least the people more happy about Trump than I am, is that I think at the very minimum, you could make the argument that it's just counterproductive to the goals internal to the administration. If your goal is more deportations, if your goal is to keep more people on board with your movement, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot while you're shooting protesters, you know? So.
Well, I mean, but I guess there's a trick. There's a trick there, right? Because history, obviously I don't have to tell you, history didn't start here. And, like, I think, the administration, particularly Mr. Holman, has been very clear about the same thing I've been saying forever, which is that the most efficient way to deport people and the best way to focus on illegal aliens who also have separate criminality would be, I think, the most accurate way to frame that, is through cooperation with the states. Yeah. By far the easiest way. The state arrests you for a DUI, the state arrests you for beating your wife, and you're an illegal. They notify ICE, they get an ICE detainer, ICE deports them, right? Like that. It saves a huge amount of money. It saves a huge amount of time. You never interact with like people on the street who are protesting you because it's all structured handoffs. It's obviously the most efficient way forward. The problem is we have states that have robust sanctuary policies that prevent cooperation. So, and not all of them do, but when you have states with sanctuary policies, your only option left is direct enforcement by the federal government. It's that, or like, what's the other option other than, putting ICE agents in there and raiding?
Yeah, I guess maybe two things to that. I think you're right. Like obviously when you have non-cooperation on the part of a state or a city, like that's going to create a need for you just have boots on the ground. But I'd say like maybe I'm just looking at this through like rose tinted glasses of like, man, Trump 1 was like felt so normal compared to everything that's going on now. But so I was in Madison, Wisconsin for grad school, and there was lots of ICE enforcement there because it's a pretty heavy immigration area, both for the university, but also lots of Hispanic, Central and South American immigration ends up there. And so there was I remember I would go out after church with my pastor to get lunch a lot at this one taqueria down the street, and we went one day and there was a sign on the door that says, "Due to ICE raids, we are now closed." And so this was happening a lot, and there weren't huge there were protests that happened during the Trump 1 administration. I'm just saying locally there weren't these huge outrageous protests. People weren't getting shot, non-national news like we see now. So I just wonder if there is some sort of tactical difference there, because even then Madison I don't think was a sanctuary city, but it certainly wasn't cooperative. But then I wonder if the other explanation for this too is it seems like, based on reporting that I've seen at least, that people like Stephen Miller are certainly not helping things, because these are people who are willing to go above and beyond what you're describing. It's not just that we need the criminals; it's just get them all, as many as you can. And to the point of we're not just going in and targeting criminals in places where people aren't cooperating. We're using kind of what to most people feels like a kind of violation of a presumed, I'm using this term very broadly, social contract, by nabbing people while they're at their immigration hearings who seem to be sort of following the process that they should have in good faith been expected to be able to go through. That I think that's going to be off-putting to people very strongly, and I think it has been. But.
Yeah, I think it has been off-putting. The odd bit about that is that he ran on doing that. He was very clear. He was not only deporting people with separate criminality. He was. Yeah. The phrase mass deportations was on people's. So there's a little bit where it's what did you think that meant?
Vibes, essays, yeah.
No, that's fair. I think the reason, by the way, that there's more protests in Trump 2 than Trump 1 is that in Trump 1 he was very ineffective. In Trump 1, he just didn't know how to do a lot of these things. He didn't actually wield the power of government very effectively. So his judicial nominations were great. That was a great legacy of the first Trump term. But most of the time, he kind of just didn't. He said a lot of outrageous stuff, and we were all very angry about what he said. But he didn't actually get a ton done in terms of moving the ball on these things. So I just don't think that they were effectuating these policies. And now they are, and I think that's people see the difference, right? When you're oh, there's actually raids now.
Well, so my question then is, you say what did you think this meant? And I think a lot of people are realizing what this does mean and what it implies, where it's oh, this has consequences that maybe I wasn't fully cognizant of.
Mhm.
And so when you say like, what did you think it meant? Some people are like, well, I didn't think it meant this. I didn't think it was my neighbor. I didn't think it was this person. I didn't think it was going to be like this. And so I do think you're getting a lot of people like, there's a very strong contingent of people who are like, yeah, I voted for this. Those people exist. I'm not denying that. I think there's a lot of people who are starting to be like, wait a second, is this the best way? So
Yeah. See,
I
I
mean,
guess.
we'll see what happens in the midterms, I guess, to see what the backlash effect actually is. But
Yeah, the midterms will be telling, certainly. Yeah, and I mean, popular opinion is one thing. I think the other thing is just the realization about how gummed up this has been, um, really by the left legally for
sure.
years.
Yeah.
Like I don't one of the craziest things that happened recently is there's the TPS program, the temporary
Yeah.
protected status program. There's all these various programs that give temporary status to people from nations impacted by natural disasters and such things. Um, a lot of these programs are close to 30 years old. We've been giving temporary status for 30 years, which is, what's in the name, temporary. But,
Right.
and the Trump administration tried to terminate them in the first term and couldn't. They just couldn't figure out legally how to do it. They got held up in court. And then the Biden administration reinstated them. And then now the Trump administration is terminating them again. And the language of the law, I mean, I don't have it pulled up, but it says there shall be no judicial review of a determination of termination. And yet court after court after court is saying, actually, we do get to review this, and ruling against the Trump administration. And then they're getting overturned on appeal because that's like insane. So like there is there's an element to this where while I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, I guess I'm seeing the extent to which there has been this like push to make these policies impossible, legally, protests, sanctuary policies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess that begs the question, like when something bad happens, and we saw Renee Good, Alex Preddy, we saw some examples of something bad happening. Is that like if cops, for example, acts, in some horrific scene, killed somebody while they were trying to arrest them, does that mean that we stop arresting people for murder? Do we stop enforcing traffic laws? Like at a certain point, you got to like yes, the bad thing happened, but the bad thing was the culmination of this long chain of events. And what do you do about it when the bad thing happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. The way that I've always phrased it is that I'm in favor of rigorous enforcement of immigration law, and so that I think would look like probably being far harsher than we have been on people that we find who are just straight up here illegally, right? The sort of stereotypical crossing the border with a coyote kind of thing, and then it involves taking a look at those things that have granted vast swaths of people some sort of refugee, asylum, or temporary protected status, and then adjusting accordingly. I think where so with somebody like Miller, right, who seems to have in his brain quotas and things that he's yelling at people, like, you got to get this done. For him, the easier path is to go after the people who might even have legal status, who for many people in their minds, I don't think were the kind of people that were being targeted, right? They have in their minds those like very illegal immigrants who, even if they're, like you said, even if there's no additional crime, their crime is some sort of, they're here and they shouldn't be. Those are the people that they have in mind, not the person who's there for their green card hearing and could have gotten their green card and instead we deport them, right? Those are the things that are sort of shocking people. And so, yeah, I don't think the answer is you stop enforcing the law. I think there's going to be some tactical readjustment, particularly after the midterms. On the gumming things up in the courts, I think that's fair as well. I tell one thing I do when I'm teaching, I try my best, even though, as skeptical and critical as I am of the Trump administration, I do my best for my students to be like, look, here's the executive order, here's the administration's argument, here's the law, let's go through it. And on everything that's been going on in the courts, there's this really great Congressional Research Service report from I think 2021 on nationwide injunctions. It's basically just a research report on how they've been used in the past, where is the possible authority for them coming from, and really what should we do going forward to reform them. And so for you, I'm sure your audience are intelligent people, but I will always shill for the CRS. They're amazing. Almost any legal or political policy issue you can imagine, there's a CRS report on it. It's part of the Library of Congress. It's a nonpartisan research arm of the Library of Congress that exists to serve Congress people. So if you work on the Hill and your congressperson needs research on something, some bill that's happening, you go to the CRS, see if there's a report. If there's not, they'll do one for you, and they're public record. And so there's all sorts of awesome research on these sorts of things. And so that report on nationwide injunctions is highly critical, and it's just like, we've been using these things. There's no clear grant of power for this, and we're not really sure where it's coming from, what it can be used for in the future. Really, Congress needs to get on reforming this and having some clear jurisdiction gating on these courts and these nationwide injunctions. And that's 2021. This isn't Trump era stuff, or it's not Trump 2 era stuff. It's we could have been talking about this for a long time, but now we're here. Now we're dealing with.
And it's a great example, right? Because universal injunctions, like if you step back from our hyper partisan moment and you ask, like, what is the general opinion amongst like legal scholars and people who've thought about this deeply about universal injunctions, everyone thought this was a problem. Like in the Biden administration, they thought it was a problem. Trump thought it was a problem. The Supreme Court noted it was a problem. Everyone knew this was an abuse because it allowed, like, I'm a lawyer, I know how this goes. Like I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I was asked to write a memo about like where my client could sue and which court would have the best potential draw of district court judges to maximize their chance of winning. Right. So like, I'm not saying it's hypothetical forum shopping. I'm saying it is absolutely forum shopping, and people pay me to do it. So like, I'm 100% clear this is happening. So, that's gross, because if you have a universal injunction and you cherry pick the one court that was going to give it to you, that's a big problem. And I guess this is, if we're going to, I think the meta Trump conversation for me comes down to this. There are so many places where I am critical of him. I think his record on free speech, for example, has been terrible, right? That's not to say that Biden's was good. I'm just saying, like, he is in power and his record on free speech is abysmal. And there's no ifs and buts about that. Like, you can just, there's even if you were to disagree as to one or two examples, there's so many that you can just take it from there. I have real serious due process concerns about deporting people to a country where they are likely to be thrown in prison, because that strikes me as a punishment rather than a civil infraction. So there's all these issues there are real issues that are worth talking about. And then if you zoom back and you're like, not on the details, but you zoom back and you're like, what's he doing? He's appointing the best justices I've seen a president appoint in my lifetime, like universally. He's rolling back the DEI policies that were on the precipice of enacting racism into law. Like we were in a spot during the Biden administration where like racial preferences were being casually given in the context of government programs, which is like wildly gross from my perspective. I was never like a no new wars guy. I was like a, hawkish American hegemony guy, and neither party was selling what I wanted. So like, he's decapitating Venezuela. He's going after Iran. These are Chinese proxy allies, which is restoring U.S. hegemony and counteracting Chinese attempts to undermine our economy and the petrodollar, et cetera. And most of all, I don't know, like in my lifetime, it's always looked like this. Progressives make inroads into our institutions, and then a Republican gets elected and they don't do anything about it, but they pause it, right? And then it continues, and then it gets paused, and then it continues and it gets paused. He's the only president I've ever seen who's actually rolling it back with any success. So on like a micro level, I have all these criticisms about him. On a macro level, there's a lot of directional stuff that I'm quite fond of. Right. Sure. And I guess that's the question that in terms of like the future of the right for me, which is like, what do we do? Like, how do we harness the stuff that we like? And obviously we have to keep the stuff that's politically effective. You can't run a campaign from 2000 anymore. So some of this like modern communication style we're going to have to keep, while maybe easing up on the populism and moving away from some of these things that are maybe strike us as more problematic.
Yeah, I guess I think the midterms and then 2028 will be a great way for us to question what's actually been effective or appealing, because I think both Trump elections, or all three times he's run, have been so strange. 2016 is a weird election year. Things happen that nobody really expected, and the real story of it is really just like small number of Obama voting counties that swap. 2020 COVID, and of course everything that Trump says about the 2020 election. I don't want to. Maybe we can fight about that. I don't know what you think about that, but woo. I
didn't even vote for him, so it's not my fight.
But then 2024, he's running against a potato, right? So each of these elections, I don't know that are great tests of like real quote unquote mandates or real popularity. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see what outlasts him for sure. I think that's a good question to say, like, what parts of this directionally do we want to hang on to? I'm worried that there's more macro concerns than maybe you're giving credit for. So the one that I would latch on to would be like DOJ kind of stuff, where I think like what's gone on there, I like going from the professionalization of the DOJ that was accomplished since its establishment to 15 years ago to what's happened since Trump took office for a second time, I think is kind of a travesty. And that we had, he's pretty public about it. We had a guy on campus who was who was deputy attorney general quite a few administrations ago, and so he's been good friends with every AG from Clinton onwards, and we were having a conversation over lunch about like basically just what's been going on, and he's, I think to my right, I think he would consider himself like he's not a never Trumper. He's very critical of Trump now, but he said like out of anything that's happened, he's like, the court cases, the this, the that. He's like, I've never really thought that all these critics were like really onto it. He's like, the stuff that really concerns me now is what's going on at the DOJ. The way that he's taken this kind of like supposedly, like he's like, when I was there, we prided ourselves on like, we are not tools of an administration. We are not tools of politics. We are enforcing the law. And that's just kind of gutted now from his perspective. That scares me a little bit. And I don't know how well we can recover from that. And I don't know that's something that we want to hold on to.
Well, so it's interesting because one thing I've been very critical of with Trump is his DOJ hires. Like Bondi has been a disaster. And like I call it the tale of two lawyers, because like when you look at like when he started using the Alien Enemies Act, that is such a deep cut. Like like you had to have somebody who was doing like insane legal research with it's
the Claremont people, man. It really is.
Oh yeah, it's the Claremont people.
This isn't just a conspiracy. I know these people. Like it's
yeah. But I'm saying it with admiration. I'm saying like as a lawyer, I respect the craft. Like that's game. Like you're good at your job if you figure that out. And then on the flip side, at the DOJ side, they can't even get an indictment to land. They can't get it past a grand jury. Like there's a talent gap, right? So I think a big issue is on the DOJ side, they don't have the same level of talent. In terms of like the separation from the executive, I don't constitutionally that doesn't exist. So like we'll start there, and that's just like an artifact of practice and habit. It's not a constitutional requirement. And I actually I'm skeptical of the whole thing, to be honest with you. Like let's imagine it was President Sanders. He won, right? Clinton lost, President Sanders got elected. And on the eve of his inauguration, there was some big scandal in Wall Street. They were like stealing from people, right? It was like stealing from retirement, but whatever, make up a fact pattern. Some kind of horrible capitalist abuse, right? You think President-elect Sanders isn't talking to his attorney general and being like, when we get in office, we got to do something about that. Of course, the president tells the attorney general what his priorities are.
The president, I'm absolutely certain, shapes the agenda of the DOJ. I'm not suggesting there's a hard separation. Your chat's going nuts at me. Whatever. I shouldn't look at chat. No. I understand these things have never been hard separate. I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to do the like destiny questioning, but it's hard for me to think. I mean, yes, there are scandals left and right. Yeah, Eric Holder. Okay, we could talk about Fast and Furious. We can talk about it, but like it's hard for me to conceive of anything approaching the level of nonsense we've seen with the attempted and like it's just like the fire this person. Okay, you go do it. No, I'm not gonna fire that person. Next person down the line. Like you're saying, you have a bunch of absolute incompetence running the show right now over there. And so even if you think the president should be directing the agenda, the people that he's telling to go do stuff are a bunch of freaking morons.
Well, that's what I meant. He's hiring bad people, and the way it's being run has created a competency gap within the DOJ. Like I saw a DOJ person advertising AUSA positions on X the other day, which is like unheard of. Like those are cherry positions that like lawyers fight over. They don't need to be advertised. So like that, it's crazy that was even happening. So I totally agree with you on that. On the flip side, like I think, I mean, the Constitution gives him the power to fire all these people. So it's kind of like, well, it's his power to use.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is like, are we? Is it the fact that like we had a tradition of not using that power, and that's what we're lamenting, that he...
Or well, what's the purpose of the firing? To what end? The end is to direct this very thin, obviously politically motivated prosecution and find the person who's willing to do it at all costs.
This comment makes me laugh really hard, so I'm going to show it to you.
Nigger, but not evil.
You should get some sunglasses, and that would be really, really funny.
Yeah, I'll start doing some cocaine too in the background.
No, you can't turn evil. You gotta stay pure.
So no, I get, like, you know, you're right. Like, and your chat is right? It's not a fourth branch of government. It's not constitutionally independent, but the professionalization and then the use of it as a weapon. I think the general understanding is this as a tool of a prosecutorial arm of the federal government is a sharp weapon and needs to be directed rightly, because you need to have some trust and some confidence in what's going on there. And no one has any trust or confidence in what's going on there right now. And I don't know how we recover that.
Well, and this is the thing. I think that the criticism is that, for me at least, is that like they're doing it badly. Like they're just doing it badly. I do think that like one of the benefits of being more clear about the fact that the president is in charge of the DOJ, I mean, because on some level, like the president is charged with enforcing the laws. Like the DOJ is like the quintessential executive branch.
I just want him to enforce them competently with people who know what they're doing, who know which laws to enforce and when to enforce them.
Well, my point is this. What the downside of the kind of like false separation between the DOJ and the president, and I never actually believed it, and I thought it was always a little too cute. But like what it really did is it allowed the president to avoid political accountability, because he could say like, oh yeah, the DOJ is doing X, the DOJ is doing Y, but I don't.
Sure.
You know. Sure. Now, of course, behind closed doors, is that true? Dollars to donuts, no. The president's in the meeting. If Obama told Eric Holder to fucking do something, Eric Holder was gonna do it. That like, but it projected separation, and I think one danger of that is that insulates you from accountability. Like, if people are right, if you've read the room correctly, and if people are like hate the way he's running the DOJ, then there should be a political price to be paid for that. And maybe that's the midterms, maybe that's 28. But like I like that political accountability. Like if the president's doing a shitty job with the DOJ, that's something that we can run on, right? What I don't love is when it's like this kind of like buck passing, like who knows what the DOJ is doing. It's like, well, come on. They're your guys.
Yeah.
You can fire them. They're your guys.
Yes. Although, no, I don't know how far down the rabbit hole I want to go with this, with an attorney. I'll get out over my skis here and get absolutely stomped. But I do think there's value to the idea that the DOJ is doing investigative and prosecutorial work that extends cross administrations, and that it shouldn't be in many circumstances cleanly tied to whoever is in office and the letter behind their name. Like if somebody's broken the law, they've broken the law, and if it's within the administration, they should be investigated and they should be prosecuted. And if it's outside or a former administration, they can be like but that is not the vibe that we have, at least for the past two administrations. Maybe more. Yeah, that's fair. Your chat's freaking out. That's fine. I'm willing to. I'm aware. I'm at least moderately politically aware. I'm kind of forced to be against. I just want to teach Plato all the time. Okay, I don't want to pay attention to this stuff. But my students ask me about this stuff, and I have to teach this stuff. So unfortunately, I have to pay attention to it. I just think like both in terms of like legitimacy from an outside perspective, and in terms of competence and efficacy of actually prosecuting the law, or enforcing the law rather. I would prefer things were not the way that they are right now. And so again, I don't think it speaks well of Trump and his goals, or what he views the office as, the kinds of people he's appointing. Like, so you're right. Like Bondi to me is just like, it's a travesty. I cannot even think of like the dumbest attorney general we have ever had in history. You would never ever call that we would have a hearing like what we had from her. It's just insane. She's a crazy lady. Like, no, get her out of there.
She's done a terrible job, and her fingerprints are all over like the absolute bungling of the Epstein files. Goodness. And there's a whole number of areas where she's been historically incompetent. There was like even making sure that like U.S. attorneys are properly empowered, that they can actually sign documents and have the power of the government behind them. There's just been a lot of stepping on rakes on that side.
This happens all over the administration though. So like when Noam is in DHS, there's stuff sitting on her desk for weeks and months that like is urgent, that all she has to do is sign it and move it on, and she's too stupid to do it. It's so frustrating to me to like, I'm sorry, I now I'm just ranting. I do have some level of Trump derangement syndrome. Your chat is right. I will admit it. I've never been a fan. You will not catch me defending him on most things. But it is just like, I've tried my best to swallow that at every stage and just been like, okay, let's just take it as it comes. And oh my goodness, like between Noam and Bondi, you've got fodder for years to complain about.
Yeah, and these are not people I would defend, right? So I'm totally with you. Just before I forget, Grassroots came in with 20. Thank you, Grassroots. Thank you for owning the stream. Thank you for the I can always tell when someone actually reads their books. When the bookshelves are an abject disaster, this guest has gained my trust.
You can't even see. Well, okay, you can see my stacks here, but you can't see my giant stack here. And it's terrible.
I will say my camera angle is artfully curated so that the stacks of papers and books that are actually on my desk are not visible, which has been. I have to be very careful about that because sometimes they becomes a dangerous tower. Yeah. And Jefferson C. Post, the DOJ is not a constitutional fourth branch. Yeah,
I agree.
So this is the thing, right? One of the problems. Again, this is where I'm always with I always am with Trump. On a micro level, if you want to criticize like Bondi, we could do that for hours, and I'd be delighted to just make fun of all the. I can't even think of a good decision. Like all her decisions have been shitty, right? So I'm going to be delighted to criticize you about that. On the flip side, when the left was in power, they seemed to be pushing for agencies as independent experts with broad regulatory power and complete political unaccountability. So, like, not only do they have the power to regulate the economy, not only do they have the power to regulate, like, you in the state, not on foreign policy, but on some very core state stuff, like your medical decisions, they're not going to be given any political accountability, and that they're opposed to the president even being able to fire them if they're doing a bad job.
Yeah.
So like, yes, on one hand, I hear what you're saying, but on the other hand, like that is, in my mind, that is the constitutional shape of our government. Like if you put power in the executive branch, the president is in charge of it. Now, I might think that we should put less in that bucket, but I don't think you can put power in and make the president not in charge of it. That's who's in charge of it at that point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would share any criticisms of sort of turning administration into a kind of technocracy that we see from the progressive era on. I think has all sorts of problems that you're identifying. I'd agree with that, and so I cheer on overturning Chevron deference, and I cheer on the ability of the president to have some influence over these agencies that are supposedly executive agencies. I would say though too, like I think that my friends who tend more towards the unitary executive theory side tend to undersell the ability of Congress to sort of put gates and fences around the power that they are granting to the executive. So I mean, I think things like the APA are examples of this, where it's like, yeah, like you can have an executive that is executing the law, but you can still constrain some parts of his behavior that's within that granted part, right? So there are plenty of places where the president has power that is not, the Congress is not directly granting him. It's just constitutional power that he has. as the executive. But when we're granting administrative power, like Congress can circumscribe it, and they should, and the president should follow things like the APA, I think. So
yeah, no, a unitary executive theory, and I am a unitary executive guy, but the really what it prescribes, Shapingro put it perfectly, of course, because I think he and I have been mind melding for long enough. He knows how I think, which is, it's exactly that, right? Like, that's the constitutional shape of the government. Now, you might choose to put less power in the executive branch, knowing that's the constitutional shape of the government, right? Yeah. It's kind of like originalism, where, in a sense, where it's like, it's just trying to preserve the constitutional order. And then once you have the order preserved, then, from there, we can start making decisions about things. It's very hostile, though, to these duct tape solutions that we've been using for a long time. Like Justice Gorsuch, for example, has been a great example of this. In the tariff case, he was a great example of this, where he's just hell-bent on sending every branch of government back to their constitutional box. Yeah. Where he's like, no, tariffs are revenue raising.
But he was mean to my girl Amy Coney Barrett, and I didn't like it. Okay.
Oh well,
that was.
I love Amy Coney Barrett. I've long said she's my favorite Supreme Court justice. I love her
good.
writing.
We're in agreement on
work.
At least one thing tonight.
She's fantastic. In the tariff case, she was wrong. You absolutely need major questions doctrine for this sort of thing. And I think Gorsuch, you have to start being consistent. Like when they applied major questions doctrine to strike down, the student loan forgiveness from Biden, the OSHA mandate for vaccines for Biden, basically destroying the coal industry under the guise of, I think the statutory language was determine the most effective means of energy production, something like that. I cheered the application of the major questions doctrine, right? So now when it comes time to decide the tariff case, I need to be intellectually consistent and say well, look, I've liked this for a long time. I don't think. I
just think her summary of it is just kind of correct, which is just is it really all that different? Is what we're calling the major questions doctrine all that different from just statutory construction? Because the law obviously does not grant taxation power to the president. And so do we need, what is the difference? I just think she's right.
Well,
so,
the problem was, so just to be clear, the Nixon example. This is what there was a historic statute, the predecessor to IEPA, which is the one that Trump used, which had the exact same language. They replaced it with IEPA, but they preserved the exact same language. And Nixon used that language to install a tariff on, I think, China, which was upheld not at the Supreme Court level, but at I think the Court of Claims, like a circuit court level, right? So that's very good evidence that this language does, in fact, reach that far.
Well, but as they said in the majority opinion, if Trump had done what Nixon did, this would never have made it before the court. If he had done a flat tariff on for a prescribed period of time on a prescribed set of goods, that it would have been fine. But because he wanted to have his fingers on the knob and constantly be ooh, am I going to increase it? Am I going to increase it? He screwed himself. So again, this is just him undermining his own efficacy, where it's if he had just done what Nixon did, this never would have been an issue. But the claim that he's making is far more sweeping than the Nixon claim, which is the presidency now has sweeping tariffing authority to set it however long over whatever they want and however much amount they want, and that's absurd.
Well, but you know what I mean. But the phrase in the law was regulate imports. That's it. That's the whole phrase. Regulate imports. What does that mean? I don't see any room there, and the court didn't rule that it was up to the court to decide. Oh, you have the power, but you can't do it too much. You can't do it like that, right? Their ruling was you don't have the power to tariff at all. Not a little, not a lot, not like Nick. Their ruling was what you can't do what Nixon did.
Now, yes, having done something so absurd and made such an absurd claim to authoritative grant from the statute that they have to decide this question. Now they say, yes, you can't do that. But if you had just not been a moron, then he could have kept doing it.
But under the law, no tariff was acceptable, is my point. So that's why I said you need major questions, because to get to no tariff is acceptable, you can't rely on the excesses of the tariffs.
No, I think on Barrett's reasoning, you could just say, this clearly doesn't grant tariffing power. So like she could just disagree with the lower court in the Nixon case and just say, well, yeah, the statute just clearly didn't grant tariff-free
Yeah,
power.
but see, but this is where it starts getting me, right? Because like, and Gorsuch pointed this out, like the liberal justices thought that like the OSHA statute clearly gave
Oh,
the
they were
power.
so dumb. Yeah, no, that's the greatest part of the Gorsuch thing is just like
Well,
showing the hypocrisy
but
of anybody who voted.
but this is the importance of major questions doctrine, right? Is that like now we're creating clarity because there's lots of capacious statutes that exist, and if you're going to read like capacious language and potential ambiguity to give you a power that just nobody in their right mind would think the statute gave, then it's almost like if you're like playing D&D and somebody's like, well, the rules don't say I can't have a bazooka, and you're like, shut up. Like that's major questions doctrine. Like
Sure.
it's just like it's basically policing the boundaries of saying like if you have a interpretation that's just so egregiously beyond the scope of what could possibly have been granted by this statute, then no.
Yeah.
Congress has to be more clear. I think that's a good rule and one Congress should accommodate. So
I think so too, and Barrett basically agrees. I think her rebuttal to Gorsuch is fair, where he claims that she's saying things that, at least according to her, is not technically her claim, hasn't been in the past, and isn't in that case. But ultimately they kind of agree. So we can find a happy medium. I did find it interesting to see Jackson, turning to the congressional record in her argument. I know that's like precisely speaking, like congressional record stuff is not originalism or anything, but just like having her be like, well, look, they never said it was about tariffs when they were debating it, so boom, there it is. I was like, you're the last person I would expect to care about that. But
what's really funny about that is that why that's funny is that during her confirmation hearing, she claimed to be an originalist.
Oh, right.
But of course, she's an originalist the same way that like leftists care about the value of liberty. Like it's like she's
a steak eating vegan is what she is.
Yeah, exactly. She's just repurposing the word. It drives me crazy. Actually, it makes me so frustrated because, like look, I think that there is, and I guess this is the question I would put to you is like, I never thought the Never Trump thing was useful post 2024 because like. He's already in his second term. He's already in power. Never Trump kind of seemed like a dead term to me.
Yeah.
But I guess going forward, like how are you evaluating where your vote is going to go in the future? Because the stuff I'm seeing on the left, I don't see how I could support them getting into power based on the things they're saying. And what they've historically done. So then that puts me in a little bit of like I'm increasingly locked into the right, and maybe I can find a candidate I like better. But maybe you don't see it that way.
Well, I've never been a pragmatic voter, and people can tell me I'm throwing my vote away however much they want. I don't care. I vote for third-party candidates all the time who I think actually represent platforms I'm interested in. So it doesn't bother me one bit to imagine not ever voting Democrat or Republican. I've never voted Democrat. I have voted Republican for Congress and for local offices, but never for president. I think since I've been able to vote for president, I voted, I think Constitution Party at least once. And then not because I agree with everything in their platform, but because broadly I think they have a good take on Christian social teaching. I've voted for American Solidarity Party before. But so it just doesn't bother me at all to think, well, whatever iteration the Republican Party takes, I'm not voting for them. But I'm certainly also not voting for a Democrat. Yeah, that's there's almost no, like I could actually, no, I guess I could imagine in a local office, depending on the issue, especially, if it was a politicized state or local office where the Democrats supported things that I care about, like upzoning and things like this for city planning, that I could imagine a world. But anybody that has their fingers in the kinds of policy that you're concerned about on the Democrat side, I'm not voting for them. So
yeah, I mean that's always my key argument in favor of federalism and localism is that like I know so many people who would never cross party lines in a national election who consistently cross party lines on local elections.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the people, you share values, and also you know the people. Like you're like, yeah, like Mark's a Republican, but also Mark's like a drunk who beats his wife. I'm not voting for that guy. Like democracy actually works better in small settings. I think I'm
I
fond of
think
saying.
it can. I'm teaching. I teach a year sequence for constitutional law, and so this semester is federalism and separation of powers. So we just spent the first half of the semester on federalism, and I'm dyed in the wool, like localist. Subsidiarity is awesome. I love federalism, but the more and more I teach it, the more and more I talk with students about it, the more I see like there are completely fair criticisms, right? Like I mean, corruption is the one that people always go to, but one that I've run into that I'm still trying to assess, that I try to be honest with my students when I'm sort of going through a period of self-reflection. There's this book that came out a few years ago. I'm forgetting the professor's name, which is terrible because I know him in person. But the book is called Democracy for Busy People. And he's a democratic theorist, who are the worst kind of political theorists. We all hate them, but they make interesting arguments that we have to think about. But one of the things that he says about local democracy is that one of the problems you have is that it actually gets, from his view, exponentially harder to have good democracy because the information problems are stranger in a way. So at a national election, right, I can go on Ballotpedia and I can look at the people who are running for Congress. My work is in Georgia's 14th district, so we just had our special election to try to replace MTG. And so I can go on Ballotpedia and I can learn about these people and their positions. Maybe they filled out Ballotpedia's survey and I can learn some things about them. I at least know what party they're a part of. I go to my city council election, and these people don't run as members of a party. And it's really hard sometimes to find their positions. And it's really hard when I find their positions to know which ones I care about, right? How do I know about a percentage or a fraction of a percentage increase on this tax relative to trash survey? Like, that's all just kind of opaque to me. But because we've nationalized our politics, I have really strong opinions on abortion, on guns, and this and that. And so his argument in this book is effectively that we actually need to take more decisions out of the voters' hands and more nationalized politics. Everything he says goes against all of my intuitions. But at that level, the very beginning of the argument, I find it challenging because I think he's right. There are information problems in local politics that are difficult to solve. So
that's the classic example of the left breaking something and then asking for more power to fix it. So like the 17th Amendment was a terrible idea.
I agree.
And amongst the reasons, and for the chat who aren't following us speaking in political code, the 17th Amendment, it used to be that the state legislatures would appoint the senators. And after the 17th Amendment, the people voted for the senators directly. This is a disaster in my mind because it destroyed people's attention to local politics. Like it made it unclear what the state's role was. And now people are like, why is the Electoral College deciding the president? It's like, because the states are the power block in our system. That's why they're deciding it. But that aside, as we vote, you said it yourself, there's an information problem, but the information problem is caused by over-nationalization of our politics through the 17th and then beyond. And the hilarious part about the argument you just laid out is they're like, we created this problem of over-nationalizing our politics, and the only solution is to fully nationalize our politics. Yeah. Which is that is kind of I've become increasingly sensitized to this problem because I just see it over and over again. We talk about immigration, where they're like, oh, we think you should only deport like violent criminals, not everybody, and that you should do it without having boots on the ground. And we are going to break the system that permits that to happen. And we are going to complain when you do something else. So the solution must be no immigration enforcement. And you're like, whoa, hold on. Hold on. I see I see you continually breaking the thing and then pushing it towards your preferred solution down the road. And I've seen that pattern a few times. So I'm starting to get a little triggered by it. I'm not going to lie.
No, I think that's fair. No, I always tell my students, I highly, highly encourage them to get involved in local politics because, I mean, one, if you go to any, like your city council meeting, for example, you'll be the only person under 50 there. But also, it is actually incredibly easy to get involved and to actually make a difference. When I was teaching at Wisconsin, so there's Madison, the city, but there's also a Madison Town Council. And one of my students, she was 21 years old, and she ran for Madison Town Council, and she got it. She's a college student. And so, I don't have any great faith in her ability as a politician to do all the things I would like, but, she cared more than any other 40, 50-year-old in the area to make a difference. And so good for her, go and do it.
I had a few super chats I want to make sure we get in because they were adding to the conversation.
Oh, great.
WM Luke Priest with 5. Thank you, buddy. Trump is dropping the pretense of apolitical enforcement within the DOJ, just like he's destroying the pretense of rules-based international law. Well, yeah, I mean, I can't you boxed me into a corner there because I've been making fun of the illusion of the rules-based international order, at least when it comes to great powers, for a while. I think it's actually, I don't know, how does that strike you? I think that's actually a pretty fair analogy.
I'd have to think about it more. I was listening to your debate with Wick earlier today, actually, on my commute. I don't like the analogy in the sense that I think the DOJ serves a different function than, and the at least perceived independence of the DOJ serves a different function that I would want to preserve, I guess. But also maybe that's just because I do have the intuition that I'd rather preserve the illusion of the rules-based international order. So maybe I think the illusion of both is good, and it's bad to get rid of them. So maybe,
yeah,
maybe we just have opposite intuitions there.
It could be a noble lie, right? Where where you're saying like, yes, this is not actually the case, but we're better off believing it.
I mean, I hate putting things in those terms, but I mean, yeah, I'm not. I've taught enough politics to not be completely dumb. I'm still really dumb in some ways, and I hang on to my dumbness very intentionally sometimes. But yeah, I mean, just go straight back to the Million dialogue and Thucydides, and you can learn, whatever the law of nations is that we all appeal to, the stronger people come in with the bigger sticks and just beat you up. That happens. But I think, sort of as I heard both you and Wick describing in the debate, I think one function that the illusion serves is that it at least for some people creates a little bit of pause before they do something, and I think that's quite useful. So maybe it's a noble lie. I don't know.
It can be. I mean, I think the benefit of it is that sometimes it can calm things down before it gets heated, like you're talking about. Sometimes it encourages a legal process rather than a military process, which can be good. I think the downside of the noble lie is that sometimes it sticks and people start thinking it's true.
Yeah.
Right. So I've had that's why I brought up the American Service Members Protection Act, because like during the conflict with Israel and Palestine, people were saying like Trump should be brought up on charges before the ICC, and I was like, I don't understand. Bet you he won't. bet you he won't. I'll bet every dollar in my bank account that he will not be brought up in charges, because I don't think people understand what America's relationship with international law actually is. Like, we're an extreme outlier. Like, you ever seen that map where it's like countries that recognize the right to food, and it's every country in the world except for America and Israel?
Well, and the reason the League of Nations fell apart is because we were an extreme outlier, because we refused to sort of participate in the rules of the game, and so the UN comes along afterwards, and we sort of play around with it. But yeah, I mean, descriptively, I think you're right. The crux of the debate seemed to be trying to interpret that ought proposition as like, is it a pragmatic thing? Like, is Wick right that pragmatically speaking, it just in general is better for us to follow those rules? Or were you right that we're moving towards a time where it's like, it's not a we should do it, it's totally case by case, or however you want to.
And also, is Wick interpreting the prompt correctly? But I'm not here to do debate rehash, so that's not the.
It was fun to listen to. I only made it through about an hour of it. So.
It was a good debate. And I hope you were listening to it on my channel, because come on.
I did, yeah. Yours came across my feed, so
there you go. That's what I'm looking for. And Grassroots Hegemon with a big 20. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for the dono. His record on the Second Amendment is abject dog shit. Also, I assume he's talking about Trump. But I think that's right. People are not thrilled about the approach they've been taking. There's a gun case before the Supreme Court right now, which is not exactly going the way that I think Second Amendment enthusiasts would have liked the administration to take.
I will say the one good thing that has happened of late is that you can far more easily obtain your suppressors and your SBRs. You can still have to get the tax stamp, but it's free now. It used to be $400 a piece for those tax stamps, and now you can just do it. So get a double stamp. Slap a can on your Scorpion. Get a suppressed SBR. Get some subsonic rounds at the range, and it's glorious.
Get your 3D printer on.
I won't say anything about that because I don't know. I have friends who 3D print guns all the time, and they know what they're doing and they follow the law, but I don't know the laws of that.
So I think the other thing I want to kind of pick your brain about is that now, as we start moving towards post-Trump, and I think I know the left is going to say he's going to run again, or like he's not. It's going to be we're going to have somebody else running in 28, and I guess the question is, like, what do you think that looks like? Because some people are saying, like, with Trump in Iran, that like isn't this proof that kind of like the neocons are still really pulling the strings and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. Maybe that's the case. But then you also see kind of like in online communities, the kind of the Groypers on one hand and the Christian nationalists on the other. Though I query whether those are real political power blocks or just online power blocks. I think more likely the latter. But I don't know, what do you think this looks like over the next couple of years?
I'll start by saying I have no idea, and I have an almost 0% track record with any sort of predictions. So if I ever make a prediction, you should rush to Polymarket and bet against whatever I've just predicted.
Little Jim Cramer action over
yeah,
here.
Yeah, almost exactly. But I think it all depend on how Trump approaches it after the midterms and as he approaches the end of the term. If he really strongly decides he wants to kind of play kingmaker, I could see that happening. I could also see him just sort of reveling in the chaos and letting them duke it out. And so I think you could possibly see like another kind of 2016 where you've got a bunch of people fighting for who's going to be heir apparent. But if depending on how the Iran stuff goes, depending on what happens after the midterms, I think basically the two options that I would see are the proof that the neocons, never left and have always pulled the strings is going to be if he sort of pseudo nominates Rubio as a successor, and for the Christian nationalist online bros, they'll view it as a win if he sort of pseudo nominates Vance as a successor. There was a donor meeting or dinner or something that he was at recently where he kind of like jokingly asked this question: "What do you guys think? Who should I choose for after me? Should I do Rubio?" And there's like, "Whoa!" And he's like, "What about JD?" And they're like, So like there seems to be some real hype in the money part of the base for Rubio, and so that wouldn't shock me at all.
Well, I mean, look, I've said for a long time in the last election with the four candidates that were running, right? Vance was the best communicator of the four by miles.
Oh like man, the VP debate was so delicious compared to the
oh my god debate. Oh my god. And he made Walz look idiotic in that debate. It was a drumming, and he was very good on the podcast circuit. I think. He's an election season monster.
Yes, here's my view of Vance. Well, okay, I have a lot of views of Vance, but my view of Vance in terms of electability, he right now is so dramatically hamstrung by being tied to Trump. The fact that like with Bondi, so Bondi's a tactic in the hearing was just like skip over the questions, just say how dare you talk about these things, think about all the amazing things he's doing, which is a terrible way to handle the Epstein stuff and everything else. Vance gets tied into knots because he's sort of forced to do a bunch of doubling back that is just a factor of the communication style of this administration. If he's just on his own and he's campaigning, I think he'll be much better off and he'd be a much more competent candidate. Yeah.
Well, this is the interesting bit. He's a stronger campaigner than Rubio is by a lot, by a really wide margin.
Rubio's going to do another water bottle thing and shoot himself in the foot. Yeah. Okay.
But Rubio is as competent an elected official as we've seen. I mean, like just in terms of like running the State Department, like all the various hats he's put on over the course of this administration.
All of the memes.
The memes are fantastic.
They're so good.
But like he really seems to be, like there's a few key actors in the Trump administration who are like the people who pull the levers and actually get stuff done. And he's one of them. He seems to be someone who can operate the machinery.
He's the only person I take seriously in the administration. So maybe that's too much. Maybe that's too strong. But out of especially the cabinet level officials, like I don't think there's anybody else who's doing anything competently except him. I think the Venezuela thing is evidence of that. I think there was a conversation I had with somebody where we were kind of. I was reading some early reporting that was kind of debating about whether Miller or Rubio was sort of more to credit for the aggressiveness with the Venezuela stuff. And I think I've changed my mind. I think at that point I was agreeing with the reporting that was siding with Miller, but it seems in hindsight with more reporting, Rubio seems to have been the kind of driving force there. And so I try to avoid talking about international stuff. It's way too far outside my wheelhouse. But in terms of just like sheer raw badassery and efficacy, it just worked. So, kudos as far as that goes.
Well, I mean, and that's the other weird bit, right? Like everything's I think everything's hanging in the balance on Iran. Like, and maybe not for the midterms. It might be too soon, but like for 28. Because like, imagine these two hypos. We're stuck in an endless quagmire in Iran. It's costing American lives. There's no end in sight. Brutal. That like I'm not even sure that's survivable in a national election, right? Just by itself, it might be the end. On the flip side, let's say we achieve some sort of win in Iran, meaning that like we've killed enough people that somebody gets into power who is willing to give up enrichment, and we'll give them civilian level uranium. They don't enrich it; they can have their program, right? So, but like a clear win in that regard. And now he's decapitated Venezuela. He's crushed Iranian oil. Cuba is on the verge of, like rebelling against communism because their oil supply has been cut off. China's global ambitions have been set back by decades because we've been crushing their economic allies and crushing their oil income, their oil income. And all of a sudden, he's the most geopolitically successful president of our lifetimes. Like, I mean, it really, the spread on Iran is crazy.
Yeah. I don't see that world, the competent world, as a realistic possibility in any universe I can conceive.
You don't trust him, or is that like you just don't think it could work out?
A combo of that. Yeah. I find like, I think he and the people executing this are just like, are incapable, and I just don't see a scenario where that happens. But again, I am the opposite of a guru. One, when it comes to international stuff, and two, when it comes to any sort of prediction. So again, you should bet against me always. I'm never standing from on high making pronouncements. It seems wildly unlikely to me, and far more likely that there's going to be some serious complaining that starts, especially if we see so one hypothetical in that range you've given is a slow trickle of American casualties and this like long protracted thing. If that happens, I can't see anything but complete and utter devastation in the midterms and afterwards.
I guess what I'm getting at is this: like, I understand your criticisms of him I think are valid. Like I kind of said earlier, the micro versus macro thing. There's like, when I zoom in, there's so many things that I could be critical of. But I guess like when I'm saying, if we had a situation where he nominated 3, maybe he gets another one, like 4 Supreme Court justices, which were like great picks. He filled out the federal judiciary with great picks. And if the Iran thing goes well, and you said that you don't think it will, but you are Jim Cramer, so you could be wrong. If this goes well, like I guess what I'm saying is, what achievements would it take for you to look back on the Trump presidency and be like, maybe there was something there I didn't see? Or is that not possible?
I'll say it's not possible in the sense that I guess I wouldn't ever deny those achievements. Like I think the court has been very good at what it's been doing. There are some cases I would want to quibble on. I think there's legitimate concerns that some people have about hypothetical scenarios in the future with Trump v. U.S. and everything else. But in general, I think the complaints about the courts have been overblown. I think what I'm going to look at in terms of legacy for Trump 1 and Trump 2 is just like what sorts of precedent is the setting for both informal and formal approaches to the presidency going forward, and how likely do I think that is to create a world I would rather not live in compared to the alternatives. And it's high, even if I come out of it saying, oh yeah, that ended up being like Venezuela and Iran go off way better than I ever thought they would. And yeah, we get these great Supreme Court justices, the best in my lifetime. Amy Coney Barrett writes all the greatest opinions ever, which she totally will. I think I'd come out of that and be like, yeah, there's some good things that Trump did, but on the whole, this and this are things that I think left a kind of stain that I'm unhappy with. I don't see any clear path to Trump cleansing that stain, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, I hear you, and I'm not trying to push you off that. I guess for me, the thing I'm trying to work out, and I don't have a clear answer for this, so I'm not going to pretend I do, is that earlier I talked about kind of like the inroads of progressivism and how past conservative presidents did not actually roll them back. They just kind of hit a pause at best. And the reason is progressivism is designed to succeed in bureaucratic spaces. That's actually what it's for, right? Like the reason academia is the way it is today is not an accident. It's because kind of like a progressive takeover, through the 60s and 70s coming into today, where you really will find, you're more likely to find a Marxist than a conservative in a lot of branches of academia. Not all. You're a conservative, so there's some evidence to the contrary, but still, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know that in the long term, the right wins a fight about who's going to out bureaucracy who. Like, if that's the playing field that you're choosing for how our politics are going to play out, I think that's a loss. Right? Like, I don't see how that works. So it has to become asymmetric, right? Like, because what the right wants is less bureaucracy, more free market, smaller government, more federal, more state, more local. And whenever you give power to the government, they never give it back. So if you end up in this equilibrium where you just end up kind of like on this slow but inevitable losing path. And I guess what's the alternative? If it's not Trumpism, what's the alternative to that?
Well, I guess I may just disagree with you in large part about that being what Trump is accomplishing. I take your point on like rolling back some of these, the DEI things and things like this. But what I see maybe more troublingly is the kind of whiplash that we've had over things that I think are fairly intractable. So, right. So one of the primary inroads for the sort of stuff conservatives have been complaining about with DEI and some other administration-specific problems, especially under Biden, is like the Civil Rights Act. And I'm not going to come on here and say, oh, get rid of the Civil Rights Act. I'm saying Title VI and Title IX give the executive pretty expansive power to kind of jerk us around at higher ed institutions to say, well, this is how we're interpreting it. This is how we're interpreting it. The court did an admirable job at the end of the Biden administration of pausing some of the extremes of that. But I don't necessarily see Trump, in an executive order saying, well, we're not interpreting it that way anymore, as ultimately actually relaxing that power. And I guess I just don't see Trump as, a small government sort of type.
Oh, no, I think he's not.
Yeah.
He's not.
So I don't see that actually happening. And so I guess even if I set aside my like normative brain, like I think that there are a lot of things I would criticize Trump on in principle, like I just think is bad and wrong. And but then if I set that aside and I just think, okay, what are the actual goals of, as you're describing, the conservative movement going forward? Is it going to be out bureaucratizing? Is it going to be winning on some other battlefield? Is it going to be making it asymmetric? I just don't see a practical way of making that asymmetry actually win for us in the long term either. So maybe I'm just a pessimist and I just think we lose in the long run either way.
This kind of sounds that way. Where you're
a little bit, I'm a little bit doomer and defeatist, I guess. But like, I see no world in which the Trump era doesn't create a backlash that leads to more progressive candidates picking up the tools that he's given them and using them against us in ways that are worse than what came before. And so I don't have this optimism that the Trump era is going to leave us with this sort of like lasting fruitful ground to make the kind of progress that you or I probably in an ideal world would want.
Well, if I was going to make my pitch, right, to you right now, the pitch I would make is the following. People like Glenn Loury and Jordan Peterson called this years ago, and they were right when they called it, which is that if you start moving to a world where only some identity groups are allowed legally to weaponize their identity to get advantages, right? And only some are allowed to do it. This will predictably create a brutal backlash. Yep. Just an absolutely brutal backlash of the exact type that you think would happen, which is what we're starting to see. And we're seeing it in various forms. I actually think like Christian nationalism is like a response to that to some extent, where they're saying like, well, look, if we're all going to organize around identity groups, Christians are a pretty damn big identity group. Let's organize on identity groups. Let's see how that goes. Right? Yeah. Like let's be a power base if that's the game we're playing. I think that ultimately there's going to need to be people who emerge on the right when the bulldozer of populism starts to slow, and it comes time to say like, well, how are we rebuilding this better? We got rid of the DOE. Now what? What's next? There needs to be people on the right who are the rare type who are like, academically inclined, policy inclined, have views on how to build these things, have views on how Christian ethics could be useful in creating a better society, and are available to do this work. And I guess that's the thing, right? Like I think that that if we're ultimately too defeatist and we're saying that like we disagree with the left, but we also disagree with MAGA and the Groypers and Christian nationalists, then it's like, well, there's like 3 people in the coalition, and that's just admitting defeat. Like we have to pick some allies.
Yeah, I will say I agree with that. I'm relatively tolerant of a lot of people. Like most of my friends in my vague political space that I align with on a lot of stuff are far more pro-Trump than I am, and I'm fine with them. I don't think they're fine with me. I think this is one of the weird parts of like trying to exist as a never Trumper is I'm just on the outs with most of them, even though I'm perfectly fine with them. I have my criticisms and they take them personally, whatever. I think too though that yeah, I guess I'm not encouraging other people to be defeatist. I guess I'm saying I don't like when I hear people argue on both sides, right? My lefty friends like Josiah over at Pondering Politics, my righty friends like maybe you or other people who both say, well, they're doing it to us, so we got to do it to them, and more the sort of asymmetric argument is that how I take it. I just don't see that going anywhere good. I do see what you're saying, though, about like you've got to have somebody here who can do the policy. So one example of this, let me give you a contrast of like something that I think the administration did well and something that I think they're doing badly. Over at National Endowment for the Humanities under Trump, there was a concerted effort in the past year and a half to give endowment grants to projects that traditionally would not have been funded by NEH, which for a long time has been a very progressive leaning institution, quasi-independent institution within the government. So in the past year and a half, I have friends. I have a friend who teaches up in at a conservative school. She's doing a project on the American founding, and she got an NEH grant for a whole semester of work on a book on this, and it's great. So they're funding stuff that is like the kind of stuff that people like me who are just like, I like America and American history and American civics, they're funding that kind of stuff. That's cool. I think that's a good use of, maybe in a libertarian sense, I might say, why is the government funding this? But if we're funding arts, that's the kind of stuff I want to fund. The things that I think were done very badly are the kind of like move fast and break stuff approach that we got from Doge that didn't think, how can we use these institutions more effectively to accomplish our aims? It's, I don't like it, let me just delete that row on the spreadsheet and see what happens. That kind of stuff I think was just wildly counterproductive to any sort of actual professionalization of the aims of the movement. And so like the deposition that has come out now with one of these Doge guys where he's just like, oh yeah, we just had this algorithm kind of run, like, these are the DEI topics that we're not funding anymore. And, scientists coming out and being like, I was talking about polarization in light and physics, that my project had nothing to do with, whatever. So those are the polls. I would say, like, here's an effective use of the tools available to us. This is what I think good professionals could do if they understood how to work that kind of bureaucracy. And here's this move fast, break stuff. And oh no, we broke it, let's just leave and cost more money at the end of it. Yeah, those are the polls I would set up.
So I tell this story often, and maybe it's useful here. Like I tried to start the show with Rob Knorr a while back, and it didn't work for exactly the reason that you just described, which is that like he would say like, we need more political prosecutions, and I'd be like, are you retarded?
Yeah, I didn't mean to say you were saying that. Sorry if I did.
Like my reaction was like very similar to the reaction you just gave, and then he and I would like yell at each other for like a long time, and then we'd go on X and continue to yell at each other for a long time, and you just kind of, there was no way we could work together. And then eventually I guess I made peace with the bulldozer. And here's what I mean by that. I reached out to him. My pitch was this. There are some things that have been going wrong in our system. That's why people want populism. And it's on both sides. Populism is ascendant because there are problems, and populism is a bulldozer. It's here to knock shit down. I'm not a bulldozer guy. I'm the guy you call after you're done bulldozing and you want to build something. But I'm recognizing that some demo needs to be done. Yeah. So how can we make peace? Like, how can I, in my small way, steer the bulldozer? Not that it does no collateral damage, but that I can reduce it in whatever way my influence can, and then be available when you're done bulldozing to start building something afterwards. Because my realization was, if I tell the bulldozer to go fuck himself, Well, then that just means either they bulldoze and then the Democrats get power, or they bulldoze and then they just keep bulldozing because they don't have any builders.
Yeah.
You know, like this is the issue. And to me, I was like, oh shit, like if populism's ascended on both sides, I'm not a populist, but if populism is ascended on both sides, the people feel like something is wrong. The people feel like there's corruption that needs to be purged. That's going to happen, you know. And then then the question is like, now what?
If I could trigger your audience a little bit, I was
please.
No, I'm teaching.
Fuck them, trigger them.
No, I'm teaching 2 different classes this semester where I'm teaching Marx. So one is a class, political theory 2. So it's just history of political thought from like Machiavelli to modern era, basically. And we're squarely in the industrial era with Marx right now. So we read the Communist Manifesto in that class, more introductory. I'm teaching this other class on economic inequality in modern political thought. Basically, like, who are the people from, you know, Smith onward who have basically said, like, hey, inequality is sometimes bad and here's why. And so we're reading Marx in both of those. And I was just teaching the manifesto today, and there's a section in the manifesto that is not in most versions of it that you get because they're abridged, but which is already a short work. But he's talking basically about populism, and he's giving a list of basically a bunch of half-assed proposals that other people around the world are pitching to try to solve the problem of the proletariat. One of these is bourgeois socialism. So it's like John Stuart Mill. He's like, let's just treat the workers better and give them more money. And he's like, oh, this is just trying to stave off the revolution. But then he talks about populism, basically, or what we would call populism, but basically people who come as these demagogues who appeal to the masses and say, hey, we're going to give you the stuff. And then they basically just, you know, pump them full of whatever makes them feel good. And then you've staved off the revolution for another 20, 50 years or whatever. And so that's the feeling that I get most of the time from the populism that you're describing. It's like, yeah, let's promise a lot. Let's give people some anesthetic and then go back to same old. And I don't really like signing up for it. There was one thing you said earlier though. I think you're totally right? The Glenn Lowry thing, especially on you're going to create this backlash. There's this guy, he's the guy actually who popularized the term Heritage American. His name's CJ Engel. I knew him way back when he was an admin for a libertarian Facebook page. Then he started reading the kind of wacky libertarians that trend more fashy. And now he's like, basically openly white nationalist. And so just the other day he announced that he's founding or joining the board of this group called, it's a 501c4 called the White Civil Advocacy Project. And the way he described it is exactly that. He's like, I went through all of the advocacy projects and I saw an Indian advocacy project and I saw a Chinese advocacy project. I didn't see no white advocacy project. Yep. And so he's hopping on board with that. So I think that's a perfect descriptor. Yeah, I guess my response to your overall thing, I think that's a good description, right? Here's the people who want to bulldoze. What can I do to be around one, you know, to clear the rubble? I guess just if the requirement for me to be around to help once the rubble's cleared is for me to be giving you a thumbs up while you're bulldozing, I just guess I'm not interested, and I'll just hang out until you guys get bored. Because I think what's happening right now, both what we can look forward to in the midterms and what's happening internally to the Trump administration, is a bunch of people who are just exhausted. Like, this is not sustainable. It's not really a workable political project, and people are, I don't think, going to stick around for the long haul with it. And I think the backlash is going to be worse than people realize. So that's my pessimism. More pessimism.
Yeah, that's a lot of pessimism. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, you know, part of what I was doing here on this channel, I mean, I haven't talked about it as much recently because the Ordered Liberty podcast went on hiatus, but you know, part of this was a political project, where it's like, what does the reasonable right look like in 26, in 28? What does that look like? What does the community that's focused around those values look like? And how, and this is the critical bit, how can that community have impact? How can that community matter? Because, like, my meta criticism of the Never Trump stuff, and I told this to, like, Counterpoints and North, who, like, do the Never Trump thing. I'll tell it to you too, since you do the Never Trump thing.
Do it.
I just think it's fucking pointless.
Sure.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's in power, he's not eligible to run again. So, like, running around on, like, a Never Trump platform is basically running around on a Let's Elect the Democrats platform. And, like, then they're going to get in power and they're going to do all the things you think they're going to do. And it's going to be a disaster, and it's going to be a disaster for, like, pretty much, like, you specifically. Like, it's going to specifically target a lot of your values, and then it's going to be like, well, how did this happen? And it's like, well, remember when we were, like, really pissed off about Trump, so we said, fuck it, let's all vote for the Democrats? And it's like, oh shit, yeah, that did happen. You know, like, I don't know, like, it's tough because, you know, like, if I was deciding between, like, a 90s Democrat and a MAGA Republican, that would be like a conversation that would be very different. But if I'm forced to, like right now, if you like click over to Destiny's channel, or you like check on your boy Josiah, right? Check on Pisco. Like what they're saying, the minimum position that they would be comfortable with in somebody running for the Democratic candidacy is pack the courts, use the packed court to override presidential immunity and override presidential pardons if necessary, and then create like a Nuremberg Truth and Reconciliation style committee to go after people who had anything to do with the Trump administration. And Destiny has now added to that, to the extent that the things that they are doing are not technically illegal. That's okay. Use the packed court to use ex post facto law to send them to jail anyway.
Yeah.
Well, okay. That as pitches go, that makes it like I have a vested interest in opposing that, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, I guess I'm not. I wouldn't say that I'm on a never Trump platform. I guess I would just say you're like, I'm uninterested in relinquishing any of the criticisms that I have of him that I think still stick. And what I'm most interested in is trying to build some sort of conservative coalition or advocate for some sort of policy or candidate that recognizes where he has misstepped and accounts for that. And if people are sort of unwilling to do that, I don't know what to do. And so I think we're facing the reality that anybody who comes after Trump is going to have to pay lip service to him. And so I'm not saying anybody who's unwilling to sort of do the performative disavowal of everything Trump did is somebody I could never support. I'm just saying, like, I have these criticisms. I think they're fair criticisms. I'm uninterested in ceding ground on things that I feel very strongly about, like January 6th, like the election and things like this. Like when people want to fight me on that, when you want to really just stand your ground and be like, January 6th wasn't a big deal and the 2020 election was stolen, I'm just like, okay, I don't have a lot in common with you, or at least if that's what you want to talk about, and if you want me to fall in line with that for me to technically be on your side, I guess I'm not, and that's where we end up. So.
Yeah. I guess that's what's interesting about it, and I think what's tricky, right, is that it's like what I'm hearing from you. I don't put words in your mouth, so please tell me if I'm paraphrasing you incorrectly. So it's like your distaste for Trump, and I'm not trying to put any mustard on it.
It is distaste. Yep.
I'm not putting any mustard on that. I'm not saying it's like earned or unearned. Like, but your distaste for Trump is such that I think you would take a political L or two in order to rectify that wrong. Like if the right lost a few elections and the left got a majority in the court again and stuff like that might be a price worth paying to fix the perceived problems.
That might be a fair way to phrase it. I don't know that I would agree with it, but I think you could chase me down a logic tree and kind of prove that might ultimately be my position. At the bare minimum, what I'm thinking is, like, I would just hate to see the kind of clown show we're seeing right now be politically rewarded. Like, if that's the kind of thing that people want, then things are worse than even me at my most pessimistic thinks they are. So like, I just, maybe more than just like, I'm okay with taking the L, I just kind of expect the L to happen with just how nonsensical everything is right now. And I just hope that they learn from it. That would be my position. That's how I would summarize it. But yeah, I think you could walk me down the logic tree that you're like, okay, but you're saying, like, even if it meant, like, even if you hopping on the internet and saying, never mind, Trump is great, whoever succeeds him is great, and that would make sure that the conservatives win, you wouldn't do that. I'd say, yeah. And so you could walk me down the tree that says, okay, so you are saying you're okay with the L's. Yeah, fine, whatever.
Well, and just to like, and this, I'm not trying to like do the like debate bro thing, but the some of the criticisms you've levied, I actually tend to agree with. So I just don't push back on them because I tend to agree. Some of them, like particularly around like immigration enforcement, I tend not to agree with. And I think the reason I don't is that I think on a certain level, we need to start being made of sterner stuff, like where it's like, if like I'm an American hegemony guy, like I'm an American power guy, like that does mean that there'll be wars, and that means that people will die. Like that's what it means. And if you don't like understand that, you don't understand the position, right? So like if you're pro-American hegemony, but any time a conflict breaks out and an American service member dies, you go, oh my God, not like this. This isn't a position you've thought about at all. Like when the Biden administration let oceans of people cross the border, it wasn't like he was breaking the law when he did it. It's, like the president has a lot of authority in this area.
Yep.
He created a huge mess that somebody is going to have to solve. Solving that mess is going to have a lot of friction points. It's going to have a ton of friction points, especially with sanctuary cities, but even without them, there's going to be, like, anytime you start an enforcement campaign, it's going to create negative interactions between law enforcement officers and the civilian population, which will escalate over time. Like this is what happens, right? Like, so you have to kind of have some willingness to say, like, oh, if I actually think this is a thing we should do, then I need to be willing to accept the fact that it will not be perfect and that there will be problems and that there will be issues with it that I don't like, where I'm like, oh shit, that shouldn't have happened. But also, like, that's how that goes. Like, there's no police department that doesn't have enforcement issues either.
Yeah, I guess I would say I think Trump got handed an easy layup with immigration, because I think you're right. I think the Biden administration created an untenable problem that basically handed conservatives an easy optical W on, like, look what happened. We got to do something about it. And then I think you're right to some extent that there's always going to be some amount of backlash, but I think the sort of like Trump's the way that it's described in the federalism scholarship these days, the Trump's approach of punitive federalism, I think, has come back to bite him a lot, which is like, it's not just like there's some sort of organic backlash to an enforcement thing. It's not just that there are states or cities that are sanctuaries that are sort of fighting him on it. It's, we are going to, where we could be pouring huge numbers of resources into border states, for example, and dealing with the tons of undocumented people there, we are going to make an example of Minnesota. We are going to make sure it's clear that they can't get away with this, and then everything else results. I just don't believe that there wasn't another option that would have resulted in almost as many or as many deportations. And I'm equally skeptical too when I see the sort of progression from the people who say, well, safe, legal, and rare kind of approach to immigration, to now, inside of, a year of the Trump administration, it's a perfectly normal talking point for at least a lot of the people who identify as Christian nationalists, some of whom are more or less connected to the administration, to start talking about denaturalization, which to me is just like an absurd leap from, we need to rigorously enforce immigration policy, to now we need to take these people who are American citizens and strip them of that. That's an even on the table talking point for some people is just insane to me. So I guess what I accept, okay, the Sterner stuff line, sure, 100% I agree. That's a very fair point. And to the extent that my hesitance seems like, well, if anything bad happens, we just shouldn't enforce the law, which, to be fair, I may have tended to that point at times. Fair enough. I just don't believe that this exact scenario was an inevitability. I think there were so many paths that Trump could have taken that would have affected mass deportation and still maintained the level of popularity that he saw at the beginning of it.
I don't think so. I put it Jefferson's post. By the way, thank you, Jefferson. You're very generous today. Trump made the violent left reveal themselves. The reason I put this up is that, like, I don't think there's any solution they would have accepted, especially from him. Like, when I looked at this and I was like, how did Obama get his deportation numbers up so high? It was through the Secure Communities program, which was a cooperation with local governments program. That's how, like, when they called him the deporter in chief, it was driven by two metrics. One was like border turnaways, and one was the Secure Communities program. But the Secure Communities program was not taken down from the right. It was taken down from the left, right? That was like, it was taken down by the sanctuary city types. That's who got rid of the Secure Communities program, talking about it was too inefficient, it was costing too much money, it was an unfunded mandate, blah, blah, all these different complaints about it. So now it's gone, right? And now, if you look at like Portland sanctuary city laws, they'll say, like, we don't cooperate, like we will not, like it's just the law. We will not. So even if a program like that was existed, there's no way for the federal government to force the cooperation.
Yep.
So what you end up having is, it's a well-trod tactic where it's like, if you're in the resistance portion of the political movement, what you do is you increase and increase and increase and increase and increase friction. And then when something happens, go, oh my God, look what happened. Right. But like what it reminds me of, I know this is an unfair analogy, but it reminds me of like when people were talking about like Israel Palestine, and they were saying like, oh my God, this thing happened in Palestine. It's like, well, okay, the fact that it happened is not enough. We need to get into some specifics about each instance and really get into it and understand that like the Hamas is maximally incentivized to have PR about Palestinian citizens being brutally killed. That is their win condition. It's how they win politically. The left has no political power in our federal government right now. They have no branches of the government. Their win condition is human interest story propaganda. That is how they win politically. So and the entire
isn't Trump, and well, especially maybe not even Trump, didn't Kristi Noem just give them all the ammunition that they needed? Do you not think that there's some world where somebody more competent and more tactical could have avoided at least 50% of the issues?
I'm sure there's a lot of rakes that could have been avoided. I'm sure there are rakes that were stepped on, and I'm sure that some of them could have been avoided. But my point is, like, I'm just not rewarding that behavior. Like at the end of the day, like when I'm like if you're gonna follow around ICE in a signal chat, you're gonna like show up where they are, blow fucking like whistles in their ear from 2 feet away while they try to do things, kick their cars, yell at them, block the roads with vehicles, like these sort of things escalate into violence. And unlike, I guess what I've said to a lot of people is that like if you go and do civil disobedience, that ends with your arrest. That's how civil disobedience, that's the end of the story, is you get arrested. You can't resist the arrest.
Sure. So without commenting on either of the like 2 prominent specific cases, I think what also escalates it is doing things with ICE that have traditionally never been done with ICE, even under, Obama and then Trump won, which is using them as like basically domestic law enforcement, performing traffic stops they're not trained for and everything else. Right. So I think I don't think that the sanctuary situation under Trump 2 required that approach. I just don't see a world where that was necessary.
How else would you enforce immigration laws in a sanctuary state?
The same way that they had been doing it, which is like when you one, I don't think they had to target sanctuary states. I think it's very clearly Trump saying we are going to target these people because we already don't like them. So we're going to use, we're going to pressure with National Guard. We're going to start presenting an overwhelming federal law enforcement presence, not because these are the states that have the highest incidence of illegal immigrants that we could possibly, not that it's like even the softest target that we could have like the highest turnover rate of deportations, but one, because of some spurious reporting on fraud statistics, and 2, because the governors aren't cooperating. And so instead of turning to border states where they could accomplish quite a lot, they're pouring their resources into these things that they know are going to create antagonisms. I'm confident on the basis of believing that the antagonisms would play well for them to the public, and they just haven't. I think they leaned into the antagonism thinking it would be successful, and it just has not been.
I mean, on the other hand, I think Tom Homan's statements are completely to the contrary. What he said is like, after those 2 high-profile killings, they said that they'd reached some agreement with Minnesota where Minnesota was going to be.
He's the backtracking one, right? That's after.
Where Minnesota was going to be more cooperative, and that would lead to less boots on the ground because cooperation is the preferred avenue. Like when you ask me, like, why aren't they raiding in Texas? The answer is they don't really need to raid very much in Texas because Texas PD turns over illegals to them. So, like if you want, if Texas PD arrests somebody, runs their immigration status and turns them over to ICE, 2 ICE agents show up and deport them. You use two agents. It's quiet. It never makes the news. If you're trying to raid and there's protesters who are trying to stop the raid, now you need to show up with 15 deep, because anytime a law enforcement officer interacts with a protesting civilian and they have to restrain them or move them or give them an order, you want to outnumber that person 2 or 3 to 1. You never want to be a law enforcement officer, get into a physical struggle with an unknown individual on your own. That's just a recipe for in the long term something very bad to happen. So yeah, like when you show up in force, it's going to be in force. But like, why would they? It would be really weird to raid in states where you don't need to. Like, why would like?
Well,
why would
I
they be
think
raiding in Texas to the same extent?
well, they need to, hypothetically, if we're enforcing immigration law, you need to wherever there are illegal immigrants, and there are plenty of them in border states. Even the ones that are cooperating, they still exist. And this is like, again, in Trump 1, this is typically how it would happen, is some sort of, I mean, you're right, this all is far more efficient and smooth sailing if you have a cooperative local law enforcement agency. But a lot of these enforcement actions in either situation are happening through federal investigations or federal record keeping, something about this person's status or visa or work permit or something that the federal government already has access to. So they have some idea that these people are in these places, and we go pick them up. And that, I think that's a perfectly fine way to do it. That's typically how it's been done. That's how ICE has been used in the past. I cannot fathom why we can think that through Obama, Trump, Biden, now Trump, that all of a sudden this is the only way we possibly could have done it with any efficacy. And also the cooperation.
What's the alternative? In a sanctuary jurisdiction, what's the alternative? The alternative you gave me was don't enforce in sanctuary jurisdictions.
No, the alternative is tactically approaching it very differently. Is raiding with information, not doing sort of dragnet style, pulling people over, imprisoning American citizens. This sort of stuff is happening at incidences that are just sort of absurd compared to what was done before.
How are you getting the information?
Well, in some cases, these are people on lapsed visas, right? That they have information about where these people are, what their immigration status is. They have records on these people. They do their own investigations. Right?
In some cases, yeah. But I mean, a lot of the time, like, what's the best information you would have about the location of somebody with a lapsed visa? It would be provided to you because they got pulled over for speeding.
Sure.
Right, but you're not going to get that information.
Sure. I'm not saying okay. Well, one, hold on. Well, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the issue that I take with what you're saying, this is not to say that there couldn't have been more finesse or things couldn't have been done better. I think that it's obvious that you could have, right? But I don't think it is viable to say, here's the administration's priority. It's immigration enforcement and deportations. And we're only going to do it in really the places that cooperate. And in the places that don't cooperate, we're just going to, you guys are making it too hard. Like, we're just not really going to do it there. And like,
no, I would say don't do it in unnecessarily antagonistic ways. Don't do it in ways that are necessarily going to create as much friction as possible, particularly by implicating American citizens, by implicating people on legal status.
Like with Renee Good, like what was their antagonism there? Like she was driving.
It's the whole surrounding. It's the whole approach that they were taking, which is papers, please. Literally speaking, papers, please, for everybody who looks brown, because you have the nice Kavanaugh standards now. So anybody who looks brown, papers, please, and then just accosting people on the street, and that's going to create antagonism. It just is. Is that maybe you think that's just the only way that we could possibly accomplish this, but I just don't believe that. I'm not making a compelling argument here. I'm just saying I just don't believe that's the only way to do it.
I guess, but like that's like a much more fundamental level. You're saying like they shouldn't be checking immigration status.
You shouldn't be forcing American citizens to prove they're citizens on the street. No. That to me is pretty obvious. And Kristi Noem disavowed that. She said you don't have to do that if you're an American citizen. That's what they were doing.
I guess this is like the part where I get like the disconnect, because like there was a California case that came up on this where they're saying like, and it got overturned, but the judge there said, like, for example, it would be unconstitutional to go roll up on like the guys who are doing like day labor at a Home Depot.
Yeah.
And be like, okay, like let's check some papers, like that seems to be a line in the sand for you as well. Whereas on the flip side, like, I think anyone who's like been to these places or interacted with any of the people there, like, knows that there's like if you're going to like run the odds, is somebody there who does not have legal status, the odds are overwhelmingly high that someone there does not have legal status. Sure. So, are we not, we're not doing that because I guess why? Like, why would it be inappropriate to ask, like, to go to a place where you have reasonable reason to believe that there's going to be a lot of people who are here illegally, and then check if they're here illegally?
Well, that's a slightly different scenario than a lot of the stuff that was happening in Minnesota, which was ICE and DHS and CBP people pulling people over with having really no knowledge of who they were, then demanding to see papers. In some cases, them providing even passports and them still being hauled out of vehicles. So, like, to me, this whole thing is a complete and utter preventable shit show. Like, the fact that these things were even happening in the first place, to me, does not serve any of the purposes you're describing. And so, again, like, I'll agree that, like, when it comes to enforcement in a sanctuary jurisdiction, it's going to be higher friction than in some places cooperating. But I just, like, because these things are so different from what has happened before, I can't believe that there was no other alternative.
Well, I mean, so here's where I amongst other disconnects on this topic, and I think this is a good one because we do seem to have a disconnect. There's one of the things that I hear a lot about is like, okay, this bad case, this bad case, this bad case, and a lot of people will point them out, and there are some that are quite bad. But on the flip side, like there was one case that came out recently where they said like 300 courts have ruled against Trump in the following way, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like the same 5 judges.
Yeah.
Right. And then they got consolidated and overturned on appeal because what they were doing was insanely illegal and contrary to law. Right. Like Judge was it Boebert, the judge who helped the immigrant flee?
Yeah, the Milwaukee judge. Yeah. But
like,
then by the same token, you have on the flip side examples of DHS just sort of flagrantly ignoring the courts and failing to provide any justification for why they're even holding some of these people.
My question is, why does your ire only run one way?
It doesn't. It goes in both ways.
It doesn't seem to. I guess you seem very concerned about one, but not the other.
Yeah, I'm very concerned when people who shouldn't be locked up are locked up because I think violations of those kind of liberties are they should get your hackles up. When a judge says to the administration, "Hey, that thing you're doing is bad," and like we're ruling against you on this particular thing, like I think the administration generally has a remedy. The person who's just been pulled off the street, had their papers seized, sometimes lost, sometimes stolen, loses their job. Those people don't have remedies, and when that happens at scale, yeah, that does terrify me. Because I have a libertarian bent that just says, I freaking hate the cops. And I don't like the idea that this should be happening to the point where multiple justices are saying, like you are basic, like we're borderline in contempt here. Your failure to provide any reasonable justification for what you're doing, why you're detaining this person, etc. Like,
yeah, I think this is when I said like made of sterner stuff. Like this is kind of what I'm talking about, where it's like
you don't have this like inherent like about like cops just snatching people off the street that doesn't bother you.
It of course bothers me, but like there is no such thing as an enforcement campaign that will not create human interest stories. That's what enforcement campaigns do, right? And like what I'm seeing often, it's like. People are like, oh my God, we're stuck in a quagmire in Iran. It's been like a few weeks, right? Like, like the Overton window has shrunk to the point, and we get information in our face in this huge way that's designed to evoke a reaction. Like there's going to be some bad stories in these situations, and I'm not saying that like you don't care about them and don't try to make it better and don't try to refine it. But the bad stories seem to make you think the whole thing needs to be abandoned or like, okay, well, the sanctuary cities, we'll just leave them alone or something along these lines.
If in the service of some legitimate end, you and like what is your at what scale would you start saying, oh, okay, maybe hold on, maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit. Like I guess maybe we just have different like scale sensitivity here. But to me, it's not just, like this is not just some one or two off human interest story. If the only things we were talking about were the Columbia student who got snatched because of the op-ed and Kilmar Abrego Garcia, if those were the only cases we were talking about, then okay, fine. But like we're talking about like hundreds and thousands of people wrongfully implicated in these sorts of like snatch and grab sorts of things.
Do you have a source for that?
I'd have to go look at the case I'm thinking of, but like I'm talking about just like in scope of like, so you have people who are being legitimately, deported. Those people I don't care about. They're breaking the law. Get rid of them. But then the people who are sort of implicated by extension, and I think it would be hard for me to imagine it's not at least in the number of hundreds of people who have been picked up in some way, and whether that's people who have been later dropped off, like the guy who had refugee status and then died in the cold, or whether that's American citizens who they didn't care that they had their papers, but you're obstructing in some way, and then actually, okay, the charges are dropped. Add those up, it's at least in the hundreds. We could go through and try to prove it if we want. I'm just wondering, like, at what scale is that deprivation of liberty, like, offensive and repugnant to you, or like, how are we balancing this? To me,
I guess like like I've been detained by the cops when I did nothing wrong, like a few times, right? Like that do I like it? No. Do I wish it didn't happen? Yes. Does that mean that the cops should stop enforcing laws in New York City? Like, no.
No. Neither
Right?
of us, neither of us think they should stop enforcing
Oh,
laws. It's a question of how we go about enforcing laws, and it's a question of how far civil liberties extend to people
okay.
just kind of
Well,
meandering down the street. Right?
maybe I can frame this up another way. I think that the burden is on you to come up with a realistic alternative. And the reason I say that is what we end up when I talked about like the progressive inroads, this is actually in my mind how it happens, where it's like, okay, there's an inroad. Okay, we let in all these people across the border during the Biden administration. Okay, the people who don't believe borders are real things have had a big outside sway in our policy for a bit. And now it's like, now let's start fixing it. And it's like, oh no, not like that. And then it's like, okay, well,
Okay.
then you end up with the nothing happens, and then you're back to the next administration, and the problem continues. But I don't think this has been done perfectly. But if we're gonna if we're gonna be productive on the right in any way when we're criticizing what we view as an excess, we have to have a solution. Because otherwise,
the solution is not violating due process to the point where the Supreme Court has to intervene. The solution is not be found in contempt of court for sort of flagrantly violating things that you shouldn't be doing to begin with. Like the solution is not shoot yourself in the foot. Like how, like that to me is so not hard. Like all I'm saying is don't break the law, don't do dumb things.
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying, the way that you scale that back is just by like not doing it. Right, like that's what you said. Like,
No?
don't
Again, like,
you said like don't stop people on the street, for example. Like, don't do that.
I mean, I think in general you should have reasonable suspicion before stopping somebody on the street. I think it's a pretty good standard. Yeah. I mean, we can quibble over the Kavanaugh standard now, I guess, whether or not somebody being brown is sufficient reasonable suspicion to stop them on the street and demand papers. But I don't want to live in a world where the cop can just come up with whatever reasonable suspicion he wants to just stop me and demand papers and detain me. I don't like that. Yeah. I have a strong civil liberties bent. I make my students watch the civil rights lawyer all the time so that they can have an emotional reaction against cops doing this to you. They shouldn't be able to.
I think the cross purposes that you're at is that as a conservative, or at least someone who leans right, you simultaneously want to play the progressive game, but you know it's a losing game.
What progressive game am I playing by just saying I, like you, like due process rights, and I want them respected and enforced, and I want to punish the cops who don't follow them. And so you have this $20 super chat in your chat here that says, if the justice system can allow millions of illegals into my nation with no resistance, but to remove those illegals we have to do the freaking lollipop dance and due process. So this is how people think now. Is there like when I went to the Michael Knowles show taping, the bar fight thing, I think it was Adam Mockler asked the audience, do you think that immigrants have due process rights? And they all said no. They're morons, they're idiots, and these are the people that I think your argument is courting and we both disagree with. And so I guess I don't understand where the strong disagreement is happening here.
The strong disagreement is this, and this is what I mean by like a progressive game that you're destined to lose. Biden administration lets a flood of illegal immigrants into the country, right?
Yeah. Handed Trump an easy win.
Yep.
And now he's going to lose on it.
Cleaning that up requires that you take steps to clean it up. It requires enforcement.
Sure. Yes.
Right?
100%.
Now here's the thing. Letting them in. You know, like
he can do that. You admitted he can do that, right?
Yeah, of course he can do that. It's just the lack of enforcement. But like
and to the extent that the administration is doing things they can legally do, fine, go for it. To the extent that they are violating the law, which they are flagrantly, they should not be.
You have not taken that line. They are allowed to ask people for their papers with reasonable suspicion on the street. Like
in some cases they can. In some cases they're doing it illegally. But they are in many cases they just have violated the law at times, right?
I'm sure there are examples.
Okay, okay. So what I'm saying is, you're saying Biden had the authority to just let these people in, but that's bad. And so now we should enforce immigration law We both agree that's good. And I'm saying in enforcing immigration law, you should do two things. You should, one, not violate other laws, and you should, two, do it in a way that is most likely to affect both your goal of maximum deportations and your goal of electoral success.
And also, as people start protesting and creating friction, as they start following around ICE officers, as they start making enforcement more difficult, protesting, blocking cars, that sort of thing.
You should make the tactical decisions that
you reward that behavior.
No, you don't. You make the tactical decisions that exactly don't reward that behavior. You know what rewards that behavior is acting like fucking idiots and losing elections. That rewards that behavior, because now the lefties are going to be like, look, we won the election off of these protests. We did it, guys. We stopped them. They succeeded. They're going to succeed now because the Trump administration just shat their pants over this.
They're going to succeed because a lot of people, to the extent they succeed, it's like they looked at Renee Good and they said, oh my God, how could this have happened? Renee Good was a good shoot. That was a justified shoot. Legally, it was a good shoot. And you have to be able, it's a very hard thing to watch. Emotionally, it's a very hard thing to watch. But the selectiveness in saying I don't have a problem with people resisting arrest using cars, and that and
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Okay. Oh my gosh. I should stop looking at your chat. They're triggering me. Leftist talking points. You guys are just brain broken on immigration. I like civil liberties. That's my point here. We fundamentally agree that immigration law should be enforced. I am conservative when it comes to immigration. I'm talking about tactics at this point, and the administration shooting itself in the foot by doing the dumbest things possible. And my line in the sand is not anything bad happens. My line in the sand is you should show a good faith effort to make as few bad things happen as possible along the way. And at every stage, DHS and ICE have shown the opposite.
Well,
they've hired a bunch of complete morons off the street who can't do anything like actually affect their goals. It's been a travesty.
I guess, how do you deal with negative selection bias in making that assessment? Because
in what sense?
Well, I'm sure I don't have the stat because I've never seen the stat, but I am positive the ratio of immigration processed without incident to immigration processed with some bad incident is overwhelmingly high. What we live in an information environment where whenever there's a story, we hear about the human interest story instantly. My mother, for example, is convinced that New York City is more dangerous than it's ever been because the news is more effective in conveying that information, though the murder rate is much, much lower. I have no doubt that there are bad stories with ICE, and I'm sure there are some court cases where it seems like we're doing bad things. There are a lot of other court cases, by the way, where them doing bad things was a judge going absolutely rogue and then getting disciplined down the road. And for the record, that dot's never connected. You hear ICE loses case, ICE did bad thing. 2 months later, they get reversed by the circuit court, but that's not.
No, yeah. So
that's what I mean. The negative impact bias is extraordinarily high here.
To fight with your chat, I intentionally. No, I'm just I could never prove to your chat of deranged loons that I'm actually conservative, but I spend a lot of time in my classroom when we're talking, especially, so we were talking about federalism at a time when this was very relevant, when you have state and local agencies and judges pushing back against the federal enforcement things. And so we listened to some of the hearings that were going on in some of the Minnesota cases, and I was very clear with them, and I was very right about some of those hearings. I was like, they are clearly going to side with the federal government in this case. There's just no world in which this argument, so the commandeering filing, there's all sorts of stuff that the state is arguing that is just, it's absurd, it's nonsense.
There was a federal court that demanded that the commander of ICE go into his courtroom and give a status report in person every day.
Yeah.
It was
it's absurd.
It was a gross violation of separation of powers, which was obviously going to get overturned and was.
So when you say it never cuts the other direction in this conversation, no, because we're disagreeing about this particular thing. Mm-hmm. But broadly speaking, I am perfectly willing to, activist judges are real. These things are happening, and there are lots of things the administration is doing in places like Minnesota that they're perfectly allowed to do. I'm not saying they can't. I'm not saying they should stop enforcing the law. I don't know why people keep saying I'm saying they should stop enforcing the law. The question is how you go about enforcing the law in light of those sanctuary jurisdictions, and I'm saying they're doing it in, I think, very close to the maximally worst way they could for actually
how about
accomplishing their
this?
goals.
If Trump did it in a way that was 20% less aggressive, do you think the left would have
No,
any different
I don't
reaction?
care about assuaging the left. I care about not
Well,
violating the law. I care about not put. This is not about winning over the left through immigration enforcement.
No,
This
no,
is
no,
about
no, no,
not
no, no,
losing
no.
people that should be on your side.
I'm not. That's not the point. The point is not winning the left because they're not. They're not winnable. My point is, would there be less protests? Would there be less people who were
Yes,
like
I think so.
getting in the way of ICE? You think so?
I think so. I do think so. Yes.
I think that's the fundamental intuition disagreement. I don't.
I think they would have a much harder time with what you're describing as human interest stories if there were fewer of them. So again, if all we had were the Columbia student Kilmar Abrego Garcia, if that's all we had, we'd be done with that. But and now we are largely done. Actually, they're still enforcing because, as you said, that through some combination of the ICE and DHS being disciplined in some cases by the courts, through some combination of the state becoming cooperative, we've reached a stasis where they are now carrying out these actions without day to day. We aren't seeing a new shooting every day. Great. We are in a much better place than we were just a few months ago.
Yeah, Minnesota started cooperating, which was like was the big difference.
Awesome. I would have loved that to begin with, but also we both believe in federalism, so we both believe they have.
You can't force them to, But
I think what's going on now is much better than what was going on a few months ago.
I realize now what I should have pushed back on early, because I think actually what this disagreement was about something you said very, very early on that I didn't push back on. You said, I think there's organic protests about this.
I say organic if I said organic. Well, I don't believe it. No protests are organic in the sense that I don't
think these are organic. I think
I can't get down this rabbit hole. Yeah. I think.
Well, no, it can't be proven. It's non-falsifiable. It's an intuition about because there's always some people who are organic and there's always some people who are not. And the
protests are always planned and coordinated. I mean, from the civil rights era, before the civil rights era, whenever you have protest actions, it's always coordinated at scale. It's always communication networks, 100%. So I'm not saying like it's just all these people just live in the neighborhood and they just came out of their houses with their tiki torches and they're just so mad at it. No, of course not. Like there's coordination, there's organization. It absolutely happens. I completely don't believe in the Soros busing and all this other stuff that people go on about. But so if I said organic and I implied that this is just a local uprising of people in the neighborhoods coming out and no, of course not. Man, I need to stop looking at your chat. I love it. I said dumb. You guys are great. You guys are fun. This is really annoying for me though, because this is the same kind of issue I run into with all my conservative friends, which is the things that we disagree on tend to obscure what to me are like all of my conservative bona fides in the background and those become irrelevant because I don't fall in line on election denialism. I don't fall in line on 1-6. I don't fall in line on I think they're making some tactical mistakes. And so to my pro-Trump friends, it wouldn't matter if I called myself Never Trump or not. The fact that I have these disagreements means I'm outside the camp, which is absurd to me because none of these particular policy issues are the fundamentals of conservatism traditionally conceived, and I would be glad to articulate those if anybody wants. But it just blows my mind that that's like the dividing line for some people.
Well, no, but that's kind of like to go back to the kind of the theme of the conversation. When I was saying what is the role that someone like you or someone like me can play on the right in the future? And when I said I think the burden's on you to come up with a solution, I meant it, and I don't think just do it better is a solution. And the reason I said I meant it is that I think the role that someone like you or someone like I can play is we have policy expertise. We have substantive expertise in useful areas, law, political theory, etc. We've read the policy papers. We have the background to do and say something constructive, right, in these moments. And I think it does actually fall on us. You know what I mean? That realization, you're like I'm in my 40s. I have a law degree. I have an ed degree. I have multiple degrees. I'm well credentialed. I'm on the right. They need people who have policy prescriptions. They need people who are not outside the camp and that they're still willing to listen to. Right.
Yeah, they're not willing to listen to me is the problem already.
I would imagine not. No, I would imagine not. No.
I wrote a piece about how it's bad that the Boy Scouts are too gay now, but I wrote it for the Dispatch, so I'm persona non grata in the conservative movement forever now. So these are I can't describe to you how frustrating it is to be sort of more aligned with these people than 95% of the population, and yet have these basically just my basic criticisms of Trump be a sort of dividing line. So no, I don't expect to ever be like an intellectual light in a movement or to be able to provide these kinds of solutions. What I think I can do is I can provide my students the kind of intellectual tools necessary for them to engage in politics effectively. I can support them as they go to DC and get involved in politics. I would never stop or discourage any of my students from getting involved in electoral politics and in admin roles. Like, that kind of stuff is amazing. I would love for them to. But it's certainly never going to be me. Like, that's,
Yeah. Okay. Well, at the risk of further triggering you and one guy and you with chat, we have super chats to read that are going to make you lose your fucking mind.
Wait, hold on. One guy in chat says, "What's your 2A stance?" I probably have more guns than you. That's my 2A stance. Okay.
Yeah. Megamax75 with Big 20. Thank you, buddy. A question on denaturalization. Is Ilhan Omar an American, not paper American? Don't know what that phrase means. An actual American with actual loyalty to the USA? If not, why is denaturalization not warranted? Repeat. The answer, by the way, is that denaturalization legally only exists in like this tiny narrow space. Basically, if you lied on your naturalization papers, you can be denaturalized. That's basically end of list. Like, so the answer to the question is that there is no legal avenue for that to happen. The only way that could start happening would be if you could pass a law to that effect, which is not feasible. Like, politically, there's no chance that law gets passed. And if it did get passed, I don't think it would pass constitutional muster. So a denaturalization is pretty much dead on arrival as conceptually. And this is why, by the way, and I've said this on my channel a lot, in the birthright citizenship context, the Trump administration did not ask for retroactive effect, right? Where they're taking citizenship away from anyone, because they know that legally it's basically impossible. That's why it's prospective only. And it makes, for someone like me, if they had done retroactive effect, I couldn't have argued in favor for it and beat the shit out of Pisco. So it's good for me that they were careful legally, and that's kind of just how that process goes.
I'd love to talk about birthright citizenship sometime, because your debate was really interesting to me, because I lean more towards the normie interpretation, and I've tried to read up on it and study it as I can. I found your historical examples really interesting. It was the most challenging presentation I've heard of it, but I have some things I'd like to poke on that might take longer.
Oh yeah, I'd be delighted to do that. Yeah, probably not starting that at 11:30.
Yeah.
Off the debate stage, because on the debate stage my job is pretty different than it is in a dialogue. My position is that there's two categories. The executive order tries to say no birthright citizenship if the mother is here temporarily and the father had no status, or illegally and the father had no status. The arguments in favor of temporary passing constitutional muster are much better than the legal side. There's tons of originalist historic evidence for the proposition that nobody at the time thought people who were temporary sojourners, as the phrase was used, got birthright citizenship. And there's examples of the government. There's all kinds of things. But on the legal side, you're stuck as an originalist with the following problem. The concept of illegal immigration did not exist at the time.
Right.
So there is an argument you can make on the illegal side, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. And as a result, I think it's substantially weaker. And I would be very unsurprised to find that the Trump administration wins on temporary and loses on illegality.
Sure. Okay.
Right.
I'm looking forward to oral arguments on that.
Oh, holy
April
shit.
1st, people. Woohoo.
Dude, I'm gonna be all over that. It's gonna be amazing. Jefferson C. Post with another $2. Thank buddy. Watch how well Minnesota PD deals with riots when allowed. Yeah, that's the fucking black pill. That is the black pill. Is that once they were no longer in we're not helping the government mode, all of a sudden they're totally capable of controlling domestic disturbances. And by the way, if I'm going to go on my soapbox for a second, this got people killed because one of the things, if you look at the Alex Preddy shooting, the first thing I thought of when I was doing this is I was like, there's no one enforcing traffic, because federal law enforcement, in some jurisdictions like New York, they can, but in most places, they can't enforce traffic. So when the protesters are on the road, they can't just be like, no, you're jaywalking, get off the road. So having two beat cops there, no one dies. And that's the bit to me that it's a striking thing. There's other things to talk about, but yeah, that is a striking point. Remember the judge who helped the ICE target plea? Yeah, we talked about that, and thank you for reminding me, Jefferson, because you prompted me. Megamax with another 20. If the justice system can allow millions of illegals into my nation with no resistance, but to remove those illegals, we have to do the freaking Freud lollipop that you talked about. This is my due process. Well, so this is the problem that I have. It's like, because I am a due process guy like you. So I do like, I am going to make the due process objection consistently and demand it. But I think it cuts in this direction in two ways. One, you have to do it. Like, no matter how upset you are about the illegal immigration, you have to do due process. There's no question. It's just what you have to do. The flip side is it should make you that much angrier at the Biden administration because they knew the scope of the mess they were making. If we didn't have due process laws, it would be an easier mess to clean up. They knew what it's like the kind of person where they like just fucking dump the Kool-Aid on the floor and then they're like, I don't have any towels. And you're like, well, fuck you. Like you know what you did and you know I have to clean it up and now you don't have any towels. But,
can I ask you a point of on the due process question? I had a little, not really a disagreement, but a question back and forth with a friend of mine months ago when this was all contemporary, where I don't think it was Garcia, it was the other guy who was the one who specifically had an order that said don't deport him back to this country, and they deported him back to that country. Maybe that was Garcia. I don't know, whichever guy it was. But that order came from an immigration judge, so an Article 2 judge.
And the Trump administration said it was like they admitted it was a mistake. They were just
right. They admitted it was a mistake. But the question that we were fighting about was basically within the confines of the Immigration Nationality Act and the judges that sets up to administrate immigration law, is the administration in any way actually bound by the orders of those created judges under that statute? His argument was no. He's very unitary executive, and was like, well, they're all executive. The executive does what the executive wants. He can just, I don't know. I was very confused by that.
Generally, yes, because you need a deportation order, and the deportation orders have legal force, right? So, like, generally speaking, yes, you are bound by them. It does have a little bit of like with the Epstein transparency law. It has a little flavor of this problem where it's like the Epstein transparency law demands the executive do all kinds of things. It has no enforcement mechanism.
Right.
So, like enforcing it becomes a little bit of a creative exercise. So that doesn't mean you can ignore it, but it does mean the executive has a lot of play in the joints. And that's what you saw in that case, right? Where they're like, yeah, we are bound by it, but like, it's not an Article 3 judge and it is like a friendly environment. So what if we deported him to a different country? Right. And I think that's what they ended up doing ultimately, is that they deported him to a different country.
Yeah. I think one of the things that makes public conversation around this whole issue very hard is a combination of like different judges, different jurisdictions, and all of these sort of overlapping legal issues that I didn't go to law school, and I imagine even for people who went to law school, it gets very confusing. So public conversation around some of these things, I think, gets very counterproductive very fast. So.
Well, this is what gets really hard about it, right? It's just like you go on Wick's show and he's going to tell you about like all these cases where things go badly and like all these court orders that they're violating. And then you go on my show and I'm going to be like, well, fucking half those got reversed. Right. No, but it's not all of them. Right. So it's like there were half where it's like something bad did seem to like it happened. And then the other half was like some kind of like runaway judge situation, and you're left chasing your intuitions, I think, a lot of the time. Because if you ask me right now, like how many times has ICE wrongly detained a US citizen? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I have no data on it.
I wouldn't give an estimate. Yeah.
Which, speaking of which, Narita says, divide the mistakes by the number of illegals deported to get the success rate, which is fantastic. Ukerist, and then shut up. You're wrong. Productive comment, but thank you for
He's been very mad at me the whole time. It's okay.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's getting you money for people to be mad at me.
If you want to pay me to yell at Ukerist, that works for me.
Please do. Please
might not work for Ukerist, but I'm fine with it. Hypothetical, Jan 6 happens every congressional voting day and never stops. Capitol Police are not allowed to act ever. Stop them without photo ops. I mean, it's the extreme hypo, but it is kind of the heart of the conversation on some level, which is that like, how do we get? We're in this weird place as a society where we have such a media apparatus that's been built to maximize outrage and disgust and anger and negative emotionality in general, that it's very, very hard to imagine doing anything that's like a big, like a change. Like you said, like they haven't enforced this way before. Like doing something new, doing something different, taking a swing at something without creating the human interest story and the human interest story devolving into like a huge new media environment.
Yeah,
I don't know how to solve that.
I don't know how to solve it either. I guess I would just say I don't. Maybe this is just a framing issue and it's not worth quibbling about. But I guess you have human interest stories in any enforcement action, as you've said. I think what we're seeing is categorically, qualitatively different than any human interest story we got out of Trump one, and I think there's a reason for that. So that's my
Well,
small rebuttal.
I think there's multiple reasons for that. I think I don't even disagree that there's been that like there was a ramp up and there's all these things that contributed on the Trump side. I think the other difference, by the way, is that like if you look at like historic civil rights, like the civil rights movement is like the gold standard on some level. By and large, there were exceptions, but like the Alex Preddy thing was not like there's an understanding you were going to get arrested, right?
Yeah.
And if you know you're going to get arrested, you behave in a particular way in order to avoid violent escalation with the police, generally speaking. And there, I do worry that there's a strain of like just like you might criticize me for being too willing to whitewash or gloss over some things that you find problematic. I do think there's a strain of like anything goes resistance politics on the left that that has the goal of creating friction points, and that's
that's totally true. Yeah. There's a strain of activism and outright propaganda that is designed to do that for sure. And it creates this genre of lovely liberal white women on TikTok crying about how they might need to hide immigrants in their basement or whatever. Like, totally agree, 100%. And so that's like, I think we, outside of the context of this one particular antagonistic disagreement, I think we have strong overlap on the issue.
Oh yeah, I think so.
I think the scale is very troubling to me.
Can I veer completely wildly?
Sure.
Just like a fucking wild veer. It's just like you said earlier that I didn't get to follow up on. You said earlier that I forgot the name of it, but you sometimes voted for a political party in particular because of their like Christian values and the way that they. What was the name of that party?
It's the American Solidarity Party, which is going to make all of your chat think that I'm actually just a commie or whatever when they look it up. But they, to me, I place them in the category of sort of traditionalist conservative. They're an outgrowth of more like Chestertonian distributist kind of economic policies, very conservative on anything to do with life. So anti-abortion, anti-euthanasia, very strict on gender and sexuality issues in terms of that genre of conservatism. In terms of economic conservatism, what most people would call economic conservatism, they're not. So that's why I say, like, I don't always agree with their economic policies or their healthcare policies, but I think I directionally like their things, and on the ethical issues that are deal breakers for me, they're aligned with me. So this guy in your chat keeps asking if I would vote for Trump or Newsom. The real answer is neither, but if I was actually forced to, it would be Trump, because I think Newsom on too many of those ethical issues that are real deal breakers for me, I just could not literally vote for him on in good conscience. And so in that case, if you literally force me between them, I would vote for Trump.
Well, I mean Newsom might be the worst person in the world. Yeah. So that's like there's some dictators in tin pot countries that I would probably need to put in the running, but I loathe Newsom. So I support you in that loathing. Blaster Bots with 10 gifted memberships. So generous. Thank you. If your name turned green, you have the most wonderful emotes in showbiz. You have access now to the Pisco crying emote, to the fence emote, to all the justices. Thank you so much, Blaster. Really appreciate you. Know who gave you that membership. So I guess what I was warming up to is, because I think I've heard you talk about this, like, what's your view on Christian nationalism, given that you've supported an organization that I think you have like some pretty major disagreements with, but has a good ethical Christian overlay. I assume Christian nationalism would be somewhat similar, like you disagree with them on a lot of stuff, but they would be good on those Christian moral issues, I would presume.
Well, I don't think they always are. I think one of the reasons I like the American Solidarity Party is I do think there are legitimate political policies that are attempts at engaging in what I would that are in line with what I would call like more traditional Christian social teaching that you get out of like the turn of the century Catholic, and I'm Protestant, but I like the Catholic encyclicals on workers and things like this. Christian nationalism, I think most people who call themselves Christian nationalists don't understand what Christianity is or what nationalism is, and so I find it a completely unproductive term because there's like 5 or 6 different distinct Christian nationalist camps. You have the Ortho Bros, you have the sort of Protestant Calvinist Christian nationalists, you have the people who use it as a slur, you have the people who use it as like, well, I just think it's good when people read the Bible, and by that light, like Jefferson's a Christian nationalist. Like there's all sorts of different camps that I think are it's just such a stupid term, because the thing that bothers me the most is most Christian nationalists are completely uninterested in the nationalist part. They don't care to define what a nation is. They don't care what it means to be nationalist as opposed to anything else. And so it's just a term that they've glommed onto, where like Andrew Wilson sometimes says like, okay, call it Christian what does he call it? He's like, you can call it Christian something if you want. He gives another term for it. He's like, call it that if you want. I'm like, what? That's a big difference between that and nationalist. The nationalist thing means something. So yeah, I find it a frustrating term mostly. Okay. I don't think the American Solidarity Party, I don't think I would describe them as Christian nationalist in the sense that I don't think they in any way sort of advocate for the kind of establishment of religion, blah, 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 that the Christian nationalists do. I think they would say it's legitimate to pursue policy that is informed by Christian ethics. Their understanding of Christian ethics is going to be very different than what you get from like Wilson and the Christian nationalists on Christian ethics and policy.
Because that's what's interesting, because that's actually, that's the argument Wilson makes. His primary argument is that I want to vote for people who are going to enact policy based on Christian ethics.
Yeah.
And so
I could flesh that out if we want to talk about it some other time when I can flesh it out more. I would say I think that he's being disingenuous most of the time when he says that, where like the debate form of it is a kind of stripped down, well, if it's okay for you to vote for people you agree with, it's okay for me to vote for people I agree with, right? Okay, great. Then we don't actually disagree. That's the form of it that he defends in debates. It's not the form that most of the Ortho Bros that follow him actually believe. And I don't think it's what he would actually, if you were able to pin him down and feed him a truth serum and make him say, what policies do you actually support? Is it just vote into office the people that I agree with? No, it's far more than that. It's a combination of that, and then change the rules so the rules can't be changed in the future, and do things that I think are not plausibly linked to Christian ethics and so on. So
one of the things, like, I know we approach this somewhat differently, but one of the things I've been interested in recently is that, like, as one of like the very few public deists that I've met, one of the things that I've like have some appreciation for is that, like, at the founding, Christian nationalists will be fond of saying something like, we had an overtly Christian founding, which is like more true than it is false. Like, if you just look at the people, but it was an overtly Christian founding with a injection of a small but disproportionately influential number of deists. And that actually was a big deal in my mind, because what that meant was it wasn't denominational. It had to look for the common ground between people who had actually somewhat different beliefs, but had a generally compatible framework. Like deism and Christianity are not incompatible. It's just Christianity is a lot more specific, right?
Well, there's a book that I recommend to people that I think presents actually a more plausible alternative to Christian nationalism. That's not how the author phrases it, but it's a book called oh no, why have I forgotten it? One second. I love this book. Religion and Republic by Miles Smith. He's a historian at Hillsdale. There's more conservative creds. Historian at Hillsdale. Religion and Republic is a book about what he calls Christian institutionalism, which from his lights is from the founding to like right before the Civil War. What you see more than nationalism or anything else like this, you see a generic presumption that the institutions that exist, from the church to your state and local government to things like universities and colleges, exist to promote this sort of like Christian moral framework, and everybody's fine with that. Nobody cares. So you get, politicians standing up at university commencements and saying it's so awesome that this publicly supported institution is here to promote, Christian civic whatever. And of course, so many of these people, politicians, university presidents, they might be deists, they might be, whatever brand of heretic, like a lot of the founders were. They may not be super sincere Trinitarian, Orthodox Christians, whatever, but they have a generic presumption that these moral principles that undergird all of these institutions are good and we can promote them and that's fine, which I would take to be very different, I think, than Christian nationalism. So
That's interesting. Yeah, I in my kind of like boulder builder bulldozer metaphor, like I feel like this sort of thing is a place where I would actually be useful. Like
yeah.
like rather than saying like screw you guys, go home. Like it's like how do we turn the energy around some of these movements into something that is useful.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's my passion
impulse.
is for like the education side, right? That's what I care about is like, I would love to grab people when they're malleable, when they're young, when they're interested in these ideas and steep them in the tradition of the American founding, steep them in Western history, and then send them out in the world to be, I think, better at whatever they do, including politics. That I've never had aspirations to be a politician or to be in policy. I don't think it's what I'm good at. I just want to teach people to do that better with my nerdy things. Yeah.
And now I'm going to get one guide by chat, so sorry. Barbarism fan, any Abrahamic faith is closer to Christianity than historical deism. Well, there's only three. Judaism is one of them, I agree. Christianity is one of them, definitionally, I agree. The third is Islam. And if you want to make the argument that Islam is closer to Christianity than American deism, I think you're going to have a tough row to hoe. You can try, but you're going to have a tough row to hoe. Incidentally, and apropos of nothing, in most Islamic countries, it is legal to have sex with your 10-year-old first cousin. So, chew on that and let me know where you come out. Because that seems less compatible to me. But, what do I know? Sorry. I just like what it's like. I just don't even like. Okay, I'm not going to get one guide. I'm gonna back off. So I know we've been going for a while. I know I don't want to hold you all night. We both have work tomorrow.
Yeah.
Something I like to do with these conversations, just to kind of like, especially when I have the luxury of speaking to somebody on the right, and especially when I'm speaking to somebody who has like a Christian faith, because I say this all the time. It just kind of proves the point. If I said to you, America is premised on natural law, is that a statement that you would like? What's your reaction to that statement?
I'd buy it. I mean, I think I could nod along relatively easily, in the sense that while you find fraught disagreement among anybody we could consider a founder or a framer, I think you're going to find a common inheritance from at least parts of the classical tradition that will agree largely with people like Cicero on the laws, that says, hey, there's this natural order to things and it's above any human law, and when we make human law, we're trying our best to reason to it and derive from it the best laws we can have for whatever situation we're in. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably one of the few areas where you could find almost universal agreement among very disagreeable people in the founding era. So it just wouldn't shock me at all. Yeah.
No, okay. This is so one of the things I commonly say is that like as a natural law stan, and as somebody who's like advocating for I guess the way I put it is like, I do think we're a propositional nation. I think the heritage Americans are wrong, but I think the problem is that we've had generations of people eroding the proposition. You can't be a propositional nation without a proposition. And if power abhors a vacuum, and other people will show up to take the place. And when I talk about like the progressive inroads, that's actually the thing that really that's my primary concern, is that one of the tools of progressivism has been to erode that philosophy to make room for new philosophies. And I don't think America survives that. I just don't think it does, because we don't have an ethnicity or a theocracy to fall back on. Like everyone knows who's Japanese, but like without the American philosophy, there's really nothing left.
Yeah. And I find the attempts to construct a kind of ethnicity just completely uncompelling, right? So the kinds of people who talk about heritage Americans have turned in the last couple of years to basically saying, yeah, things started to really go wrong with like the Ellis Island generation, right? It's not even just like, more recent waves of illegal immigration. It's even the, dirtier European whites that didn't get properly assimilated in that early 20th century period that really bother them. and you've got to be a heritage American back to the founding or earlier to really count. I think that's completely uncompelling to American history, right?
Yeah, I would agree. And this is actually where I'm guilty of like a severe asymmetry, because when I talk about immigration with people, oftentimes they'll say things like, well, let's talk about economics. And I'm like, I don't care about economics. Like what the reason I'm concerned about immigration is that we're a propositional nation and we're no longer requiring that people who come here assimilate to the proposition. In fact, we're doing the opposite. And I don't think that works. I think that's literally the end of the nation as we know it in the long term. So like it's kind of like a particularity of mine that I care about this issue for like a totally different reason than everybody else does. Yeah. But it is like
a good reason though.
it's a really good reason. And to those of you in chat who are giving Ukerist a hard time, I just want to prove the point.
They were great.
Every time I talk to somebody who leans left and I say America's premise on natural law, they respond with, that's nonsensical, or objective morality is a sham, or some version of Sky Daddy. So, like, again, when people said, like, how did you end up on the right? It's like, well, one of my projects was originalism, which we've talked about. Another one was like trying to restore American reverence for natural law, and have that conversation with a few people on the left and see how it goes. And you'll quickly, but then it's so funny because you talk to not even someone who like is deeply into the philosophy, but just like someone who just is Christian and goes to church, and you say like, well, what do you think about natural law? And they'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like it's just because it's in the atmosphere, it's in the air you breathe,
Well, and I'm the section I'm teaching right now in the separation of power section of the course. We're just now about to get to, we should have done this at the beginning of the semester, but we're just now about to get to just like a quick and dirty breakdown of different judicial interpretational philosophies. And I think people forget a lot of times that natural law is a judicial philosophy among the options. I think it pairs well with originalism for the reasons that you could describe, but like there is a strain of interpretation of law that says like, we do this not just through like what's on the text, not just saying that the guys who put it down are super smart and they were always right about everything. It's comparing this to some certain natural law principles, which I think I've heard you articulate in response to recent debates that I've heard people have, where like somebody's like, well, yeah, it doesn't really matter. We can change whatever part of the Constitution. It still remains American. Well, okay, if we're chucking out the entire First Amendment, hold on, we're rubbing up against some things that we're claiming are natural law principles, right?
That's why I was so frustrated watching Erudite debate Wilson, because it was like, that's the answer. He kept pushing her on this point where it's like, well, if we can amend the Constitution in any way, why can't we amend it in the way that I want to, assuming I have the political will? And the only answer is this, that America is premised on a specific moral system and specific moral claims, and there are some things that are just un-American because they violate natural law. That's the answer to the question. And if you like, and she doesn't, because she doesn't, she's very confusing, I think because she doesn't really believe in objective. She's an objective anti-realist, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's who she is. And she's not going to give that answer, but it was very frustrating.
I think where the like hang up was happening, and I think could maybe be clarified in the future, is like, I think she and Wilson both were chasing this down from a purely like mechanical rules-based institutional perspective, right? So it is within the rules of the game to be able to change the rules of the game, right? Okay, great. So that means you can't have a special set of rules that you can't change because it's within the rules of the game to change the rules of the game, right? Right. And so they just circled on that for quite a while, and I think they were both sort of missing, or he was maybe winning the point, or from his perspective winning the point by forcing her to concede that the only thing that's American on that account would be the fact that you can change the rules, rather than saying, well, you can change the rules, and technically that's an option available to you, but at the point where you're changing this, and this, now you've undermined the foundation of the whole thing. So,
well, one of the interesting things about watching his debates is that it took me a little while to spot this, but a lot of his arguments are aimed at forcing people to say that there are God-given rights. That's what he's doing a lot of the time.
Yeah,
where he's saying like, well, why can't I change the rules? Why can't we? And eventually the answer should be because we were made in God's image and it is contrary to human nature as given by God. Like that's what natural law is. That's what he's looking for, right? That he's driving towards that. And
then he just wants to chase you down on like, do you have a foundation to believe in God and blah, blah, blah. And so.
Well, no, but I've never even seen someone say that. Like that was what's odd about the area debate, is that she's Christian. So she could have easily said that.
Yeah.
but didn't. Like, normally atheists won't say that because they're atheists, so of course they're not going to say that. But like, she actually could have and didn't, and that's what made it so interesting.
I didn't watch that whole debate. I
It's
got
9 hours long.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. It was all just, yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested to see how both of them would approach it, given another crack at that same topic. But I don't know. It's there are a lot of directions it could have gone. So
Yeah. Oh my God. Sorry. I'm not going to do all your comments, man. Stuttering non-argument. Muslims can't deny the Christ's strong relationship with God, where deists can and often did. What I was saying was compatible with. And if you look at American history and you don't see that deism and Christianity are compatible, when it was that mixture that the whole country was literally founded on, I don't know what to tell you. Like, there's overwhelming historic evidence for the fact that these are compatible worldviews. And on the flip side, you're saying that I guess the scriptural interpretation you favor is different. Who gives a fuck? Like, I'm talking about whether they are societally compatible. And one of the big questions we have to answer in the future is whether and to what extent Islam is compatible with American values. I know many people who are Muslim who are deeply compatible with American values. My concern, if I'm just going to be honest, is that they do that by disregarding very specific non-optional parts of their religious text, which is a challenge to me. At least the Bible. I mean, you're better at Bible stuff than I am, so you probably could back me up on this, I hope. The Bible gives you some leeway room because it doesn't say it's the direct translation of the Word of God. It's a man writing it down. There's more room. There's a little bit more interpretive room, I would say.
That's probably true. In saying that, I could get in trouble because it's going to depend on who you ask, but most, call it traditional or quote it little o Orthodox denominations or Catholics or Orthodox would say it is God's inspired word. There's the room that you're talking about, I think, is like the doctrine of inspiration of Scripture is that God is inspiring a human author, and so it bears character traits of their authorship and style and things like this. And then you get a range of stuff on like inerrancy or not and blah blah blah. But I think my understanding of at least the sect of Islam I'm most familiar with is like, yeah, the claim is that the Quran is the eternal unchanging word of God, and in its Arabic form set down by Muhammad is literally like just these are the words of God, like he's just pure channeling the eternal words that have never changed from God into the text. So yeah,
which then makes things like you must kill apostates like that's tough. If there's it's a tough combination. I think we should start probably wrapping this up.
Probably. It's a little late.
I can go to sleep. Yeah. First of all, Ukerist, thank you so much for coming on. I know we got into a contentious conversation, but I'm glad that we have been doing this. did a little thing with Connor. I'm going to do another thing with Connor on Monday. Just kind of like touching base with the what I would say, like it's like the whatever ghosts are left of the center right. And kind of
see where we happy few.
See where we all landed. And I think it's helpful because in the future we're going to have to figure out what these coalitions look like, and I think that there's actually like a lot of work to be done because people are in pretty different spots, which is part of the good thing about this conversation is figuring out where those spots are. So anyway, thank you so much. I don't know if you have stuff coming up, if you want to shout out your stuff or tell people where to find you.
No, I don't really have anything coming up. I write on Substack. The Substack is everythingwasbeautiful.substack.com. I've been a little slow lately, but I have a series on Vonnegut I'm going to be working on over the next few months as I work on a paper on Vonnegut for this edited volume. So if you're interested in sci-fi, politics, and literature, that kind of stuff, I write on that, and then political theory and stuff. So you can follow me there, and that's the only real content creation I do. But yeah, thanks for having me. No, it was a good back and forth and gives me things to think about. And maybe if we ever rehash this in the future, I'll have more concrete proposals for what it would look like for my preferred alternative and exactly what scale I think is happening that's so bad and so on. So that'd be a fun conversation maybe.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't a debate, so you're not supposed to come in with your prepared flow chart, right? So it's all
darn it, I don't have my sources.
I know.
But I thank you. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for talking so long. This is a lot of fun. I hope my wife and children are still asleep upstairs and not just seething at me. But this is a lot.
Yeah,
I love this kind of stuff. So
that's always the risk. Well, I know. Thank you so much, and like it's fun because normally we're on the same side of a debate panel, so it's nice to get something where we can actually go back and forth with each other instead of just teeing off on people who think shrimp are more valuable morally than people.
Oh my
And
goodness,
and if you have not watched the shrimp welfare debate featuring non-fawn, you should, because holy shit, that's some shit. That is the great.
Every time I talk to somebody who's like that, these analytic philosophy brain kind of people, I realize like there are people whose brains just work so differently from mine that I start to understand why people question whether or not certain human beings deserve more. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But their brains work very differently from mine.
It's wild. It's fucking wild. It's especially funny too because it like they'll be like, well, hold on, isn't this the most logical thing? And I'm like, you are advocating for the most counterintuitive, like anti-common sense proposal possible.
Yep.
No, it's like like no one should take this seriously. And I hope, but like, look, if you want to give your money to it, I guess I can't stop you. It's not actively harmful to my knowledge, so sure.
Yeah.
No, then I'll watch shrimp prices will go up, and I'll be a.
Yeah. Oh no. Well, yeah. Thanks again for having me. It was fun.
Hey, man. Good to see you.
Thanks even to the antagonistic chatters. You guys are the best.
Yeah, let's do it again.
I didn't mean you're actually dumb. I'm sorry. I was joking.
It's all good, buddy. Glad to have you on. Thanks for being here.
All right. Have a good night.
Cheers.
Bye.
All right. That was fun. That was a good conversation. I'm curious what you guys think about how that went. I'm very curious how you think that went. I mean, obviously, there's some stuff that we really agree on, and Ukerist is like overwhelmingly good faith and smart and intelligent, and is exactly the kind of person that we're going to need to build a kind of like reasonable right and to advocate for good policy and to do these things. But I don't know if I articulated this as well as I could have or should have. And maybe you guys will let me know if I did it well or not. My concern is that, yeah, he got the natural law question right. It seems what I mean. Like anybody on the right, like it's just like they all get it right every single time. It's just it's very obvious to them. But the concern I have about that strain is it's like, and this is kind of what I was telling Connor in a conversation a few months ago. Like, isn't it just losing to, oh yeah, this is Jason, this is it, perfect. He needs to break from the left framing of everything. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like it's like if you adopt the kind of like progressive left framing of the topic and you buy into that at the beginning, you're always playing a losing game, right? Like you can't out progressive the progressives. You can't out bureaucracy the progressives. And that's going to require on some level it's going to require that you are willing to do something that is going to upset them. Now, you could get into the question of like, does Trump delight in upsetting them too much? And that's, I think that's possibly true. You know, I don't think I'd argue that point. But yeah, I don't think you can get into like, unfortunately, when you get into this game, it's kind of like what I was saying to Connor about USAID, where it's like, if we get into this game of trying to evaluate each NGO and each department and each thing, isn't it the case that like 5 years later, you're going to be stuck in this endless bureaucratic hellhole and you're never going to have cut anything? And I just, yeah, it's ultimately a losing framing, as I guess my concern. Like I think that it's basically fighting from behind always, and I don't know that that's viable. It seems like there's going to need to be an assertion of an alternative phrasing, and it has to be a positive one. Um, and maybe this is where this natural law project bears fruit. Where because then you can start saying like that there's a directionality to the opposing view, and that there's a system, and it's not arbitrary. It's actually set up and driving in a particular direction that is contrary to progressivism. I don't know. I'm gonna have to ponder that. I don't know what you guys think. It's tricky because I'm sympathetic to a lot of his concerns. I am. I just don't know. I just don't know that you can play in that sandbox and win, right? So what do you do with that? What do you do with that? Progressivism and progress are not the same thing, Looper. You can celebrate progress without celebrating progressivism. Anyway, it's a little bit tricky. Zero Fox says the selection bias was the right thing to ask. A lot of the issues that less hold on media allows them to set up the frame to begin with, highlighting bads that were previously normal. Yeah, that's the thing. Like I didn't want, it wasn't a debate, so I didn't want to go like debate mode. But it's like like I have no idea how widespread some of these things actually are. Like what the percentages are. It just doesn't. It doesn't strike me as something that I know empirically. I know that there's been some human interest stories. And then on the flip side, I don't think that there's, it's all selective outrage, I guess is what I mean, where it's like, we'll get outraged about one thing, but not outraged about another thing. And that's politics. That's what politics is today, is selective outrage. But yeah, it does strike me that, if you're going to be upset about the border and you're going to be upset about the runaway judges, and you can also be upset about the enforcement, but you should be upset about all these things, not just one of them. Wrong I trust under 2%. That's interesting, Cacophons. That's something I should look into. I should get that stat. Like, how does wrongful ICE arrest compare to wrongful arrests by other law enforcement agencies? That's worth knowing. That's worth knowing. Okay. In any event, guys, it is past midnight. I am getting quite tired and worn out from all this talking, especially because my throat hurts a little bit. But I very, very much appreciate all of you. I deeply, deeply appreciate your comments and your generosity and your support. It was a great conversation. I hope that you enjoyed it, but I am going to bid you adieu and call it a night. So have a wonderful evening, everybody. I'm going to tune out for now, and I will see you next time. Have a good night, everybody.